Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by 𝗧𝗵𝗲 on Wattpad. Now, let's start. Success sighed and went to his own room to sleep. The following morning, they ventured out to buy clothes and a new phone to avoid drawing attention. After returning to their apartment and dropping off their bags, they left again, wandering aimlessly. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 inquired if 𝗧𝗪𝗃 had researched the gangs mentioned the previous night. 𝗧𝗪𝗃 confirmed that his search yielded few positive results. They stopped at a park, sitting on swings and gazing at the sky, feeling distant from home with no clear path back. As night fell, 𝗵𝘃𝗲 broke the silence, questioning whether their quirks still functioned. 𝗧𝗪𝗃 examined his hand, and to their surprise, a small flame flickered from 𝗵𝘃𝗲's fingertips. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 smirked, realizing they needed to continue training. 𝗧𝗪𝗃 smiled back, and they resumed their training the next morning, putting aside their predicament. While at the park, 𝗬𝐬𝐺 approached them, running and calling out. They noticed bruises on his face and tattered clothes. When he reached them, he collapsed. 𝗧𝗪𝗃 knelt beside him as 𝗬𝐬𝐺 struggled to speak, too exhausted to finish his thought. The two exchanged worried glances before helping 𝗬𝐬𝐺 sit on the slide. Suddenly, a voice interrupted, reminding them that they had been told to stay put. 𝗬𝐬𝐺 froze, and they turned to see the same group from before. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 rolled his eyes, smirking as he cracked his knuckles and faced them. The leader brandished a baseball bat, but 𝗧𝗪𝗃 remained calm while 𝗬𝐬𝐺 clung to him in fear. 𝗧𝗪𝗃 reassured him, stating that 𝗵𝘃𝗲 could handle the situation. As 𝗵𝘃𝗲 took down the group, 𝗧𝗪𝗃 prepared to intervene when one of the members attempted to attack. He swiftly kicked the assailant, and before the leader could retaliate with the bat, 𝗵𝘃𝗲 delivered a decisive kick to his face, ending the confrontation. Afterward, they returned to 𝗬𝐬𝐺, with 𝗧𝗪𝗃 carrying him on his back. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 asked where the others were, and 𝗬𝐬𝐺 directed them. Upon arrival, the group expressed relief at seeing 𝗬𝐬𝐺 safe. Once again, 𝗵𝘃𝗲 and 𝗧𝗪𝗃 escorted them to 𝗧𝗪𝐺's house, where 𝗧𝗪𝗃 tended to their injuries. Mikoto acknowledged their help, while 𝐻𝐴N, placing an arm around 𝗧𝗪𝗃, remarked that they couldn't fight for themselves. 𝗵𝘃𝗲, arms crossed and leaning against the wall, listened as they expressed interest in learning to fight. 𝗬𝐬𝐺, surprised, asked if they were serious. 𝗧𝗪𝗃 nodded, continuing to treat Takuya's wounds, and Mikoto eagerly inquired when they could start. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 responded that they could begin right away. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 left the room after responding to 𝗧𝗪𝗃, who finished treating Takuya's wound and stood up. He gestured for the group to follow him, and they quickly left after 𝗵𝘃𝗲, leaving 𝗧𝗪𝗃 smiling as he tidied up the room. 3 days later, after the duo decided to train the group, 𝗧𝗪𝗃 left, leaving everyone puzzled, especially since he had been the most eager to learn. 𝗬𝐬𝐺 explained that 𝗧𝗪𝗃 had been acting this way since their encounter with 𝗬𝐭𝐚𝗲. 𝗧𝗪𝗃, unfamiliar with the name, asked who 𝗬𝐭𝐚𝗲 was, and 𝗬𝗃 informed him that 𝗬𝗚𝗎 was the one who had tried to harm them. 𝗧𝗪𝗃 could only respond with a simple acknowledgement. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 then stood up, cracking his knuckles and declaring that it was time to start training, which made the group uneasy. After training, the group headed home while 𝗧𝗪𝗃 and 𝗵𝘃𝗲 wandered around the neighborhood, avoiding the city. 𝗧𝗪𝗃 checked on 𝗵𝘃𝗲, who insisted he was fine. As they walked, 𝗵𝘃𝗲 accidentally bumped into someone and was about to brush it off when he heard the familiar voice of Midoriya apologizing. Midoriya greeted them with a smile, and as they looked behind him, they saw the Baku squad approaching. Kaminari expressed his concerns about their situation, while 𝗵𝘃𝗲 shot him a glare. The group was surprised to see 𝗧𝗪𝗃 and 𝗵𝘃𝗲 together. Kirishima confirmed they were okay, and Sero asked how long they had been there. Midoriya was taken aback to learn they had been missing for a month, leading him to mutter about a possible time difference. 𝗵𝘃𝗲, annoyed, turned to leave, prompting Kirishima to ask where he was going. 𝗧𝗪𝗃 explained that they had rented an apartment nearby and would share what they had been doing once they arrived. Once at the apartment, 𝗧𝗪𝗃 provided clothes for everyone to change out of their hero costumes before explaining their situation. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was excited about the idea of no quirks, while Denki noted that their elbows looked different. Midoriya speculated that their transportation might have caused the changes. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 then asked about the gangs they had mentioned, and Todoroki confirmed they were hoping to join one, which shocked the group. Denki questioned the wisdom of joining a gang, while Zero pulled him away from Todoroki. Todoroki clarified that not all gangs were bad, as one of their new friends was part of one. Todoroki mentioned they could meet this friend the next day since they were training together. He stood up to indicate he had one more bed in his room, while Bakugo mentioned they had 3 vacant rooms down the hall and didn't care who shared with him. Kaminari claimed Zero as his roommate, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 turned to Midoriya, who agreed to room with Todoroki, assuming Bakugo wouldn't want to share with him. The next morning, the group followed Todoroki and Bakugo to the training grounds, waiting for their trainees to arrive. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 suggested they could still train in the meantime, and he took a position in the middle of the field. Denki joined him enthusiastically, while Midoriya wandered toward a clearing, followed by Todoroki. Zero approached 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and Denki, warning them not to do anything reckless. As they began training, Denki dodged an attack from 𝗧𝗵𝗲 but accidentally got punched in the face. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 quickly helped him up, and Denki brushed himself off, suggesting they train together. Meanwhile, Takemichi and his friends arrived and noticed the newcomers. Bakugo remained silent, waiting for. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 checked on Bakugo as they fought off villains in the city, asking if he was alright. Bakugo remained silent, focusing instead on one of the villains. He skillfully dodged an attack, leaping into the air before crashing down onto the villain, pinning them to the ground. He issued a stern warning, threatening that any funny business would result in serious consequences. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, undeterred by Bakugo's silence, moved toward another villain, reminding Bakugo to be careful as he pursued the escaping foe. Just then, Todoroki arrived, quickly encasing the villain in ice. He complimented Bakugo on his efforts, but Bakugo merely glared in response, dismissing the praise with a casual remark as he stood up and walked away. Suddenly, Bakugo was pushed aside by Todoroki, who activated his fire quirk just in time to avoid an attack. Bakugo shot him a glare before noticing the villains smirking at them. The villain taunted them, stating that while they had evaded one attack, they wouldn't be able to escape the next. With that, the villains summoned various portals around them. Bakugo prepared for an attack, standing back to back with Todoroki, who remained vigilant. To their surprise, a portal opened beneath them, sucking them in. They landed in a random alley in Shibuya, Tokyo. Todoroki was the first to rise, scanning their surroundings while Bakugo dusted himself off, gritting his teeth in frustration. He asked Todoroki where they were, and Todoroki suggested they should leave the alley. Bakugo raised an eyebrow at him, questioning the need to escape when they were still in the midst of their battle against the villains. Todoroki explained that it was a precaution, as it didn't seem like they were in their home dimension. Bakugo looked around, noticing that the people around them lacked any mutant features or quirks. Todoroki concluded that they had been sent to another dimension without quirks. Bakugo clicked his tongue in annoyance, realizing he couldn't walk around in his hero costume. Todoroki assured him he would return and left the alley to find clothes. Unbeknownst to Bakugo, Todoroki had his father's credit card for emergencies. He entered a clothing store, greeted by a friendly sales lady. He selected clothes he thought Bakugo would wear, along with some for himself, and paid without any issues. As he left the store, he wondered how they would find a way back home. Upon returning to the alley, Todoroki handed Bakugo one of the bags without a word. They separated to change before regrouping at the front. Bakugo assumed Todoroki had a plan as they exited the alley and began walking in a random direction. Todoroki confirmed they needed to find shelter first. Bakugo observed that while they were still in Shibuya, the only difference was the absence of quirks. Todoroki remarked that since they had never been to Shibuya in their own world, he doubted Bakugo knew where they were going. Bakugo clicked his tongue in frustration, and they decided to head toward a quieter area away from the crowds. Their aimless wandering led them to a park where they witnessed a group of men attacking others. They exchanged glances and nodded, rushing to assist. Bakugo threw a punch at one of the attackers, who had been kicking a blonde individual with long hair, while Todoroki kicked another assailant in the gut, saving another blonde from further harm. A tall man with raven hair confronted them, but Bakugu responded with a punch to the face, followed by a kick to the stomach, surprising everyone around. Todoroki helped the injured blonde to his feet, smirking at the situation. The attackers, realizing they were outmatched, retreated, warning that this wasn't over. Bakugu smirked and gestured for Todoroki to follow him out of the park. Todoroki noted that the wounded individuals needed treatment and helped one of them up, placing their arm over his shoulder. The duo accompanied the group to a nearby house belonging to one of the blondes, where they assisted in treating their injuries. One of the chestnut-haired males wearing glasses expressed gratitude for their help, explaining that others usually ignored them. Todoroki nodded as he continued to tend to the wounds of another individual with shoulder-length hair. The glasses-wearing male introduced himself as Kazushi Yamagishi, while another introduced himself as Takuya Yamamoto. The raven-haired man smiled and introduced himself as Makoto, followed by the other blonde, Takemichi Hanagaki, and the red-haired male, Atsushi Sendo, who offered a friendly smile as he introduced himself. Todoroki introduced himself and Bakugu, who remained silent. Yamagishi noted that it was his first time seeing them and asked if it was theirs as well. Todoroki nodded, explaining they were from Shizuoka and had come for family reasons. The reason glance towards Bakugu revealed that the city they inhabited was non-existent, prompting the need for a cover story about their origins and purpose for being there. Yamagishi remarked on the distance from Shizuoka, while Makoto questioned whether he had even studied. The group decided to split up due to the late hour and the dangers posed by gangs outside. Bakugu and Todoroki continued their search for shelter. Bakugu, casually placing his hands behind his head, asked Todoroki what their next move was. Todoroki, pulling out his phone, expressed concern about using it, suggesting they might have traveled back in time to 2005, as indicated by the calendar on Takemichi's wall. Bakugu processed this information, realizing they were not only in another universe but also in a different time period. Todoroki then pointed out a nearby apartment complex, and they entered, guided by the building manager. After inspecting the apartment and finding it satisfactory, they decided to take it. The manager informed them to call if they needed anything before departing. Once inside, they placed their belongings down and sat in silence on the sofa. Bakugu eventually stood up, informing Todoroki that he would see him the next day before heading to his room. Todoroki, after attempting to message Midoriya and the others without them to get ready. When Makoto asked who they were, Bakugu simply stated that they were with him and instructed them to get in position. Todoroki noticed Takemichi and informed Midoriya, who was curious about how Bakugu would train. They approached Bakugu, who was sitting on a slide, and Todoroki looked at the group awaiting instructions. Midoriya surprised everyone by pulling out his notebook, prompting Todoroki to acknowledge Takemichi's return. Takemichi replied with a wry smile, and Midoriya asked if they had taught the others yet. Denki, Kirishima, and Zero approached, curious about what was happening. Midoriya showed Kirishima his notebook, and Kirishima agreed to help teach them, confirming that the group was okay with it. They began training together until noon, and as the day came to a close, they split up and headed home, leaving the park. Yamagishi waved goodbye, and Todoroki nodded while Kirishima smiled. Midoriya waved along with Denki, and Zero was busy waking Bakugu, who had fallen asleep on the slide. The group pondered where they might join a gang. Denki approached the group, expressing uncertainty about their plans. Zero shrugged, voicing his concerns about joining a gang and the need to conceal their identities to avoid unwanted attention from rival groups. Kirishima suggested they brainstorm ideas for disguises, which Midoriya agreed was a wise course of action. Zero placed an arm around Todoroki as they walked, while Bakugu and Todoroki opted to take a stroll at night, eager to escape the confines of their apartment. The others were preoccupied with thoughts about potential disguises and aliases in case their identities were questioned. Bakugu bluntly remarked that the others were overthinking the situation, while Todoroki countered that it would be problematic if one of them were to get hurt before returning home. Bakugu, irritated, questioned Todoroki's perspective, but Todoroki clarified that he was merely expressing concern. As they reached a park, they noticed a blonde individual confronting a thug who was menacing a boy. Recognizing the blonde, Todoroki felt inclined to leave, but Bakugu had other intentions. He crept closer, hiding behind a bush, while Todoroki followed suit to maintain their cover. Todoroki inquired about their purpose, but Bakugo dismissed him, feeling uneasy about the blonde's presence. They observed 𝗧𝗵𝗲, who began sharing a perplexing story about falling onto train tracks and suddenly finding himself back in middle school, 12 years in the past. Bakugo expressed skepticism about the boy's claims, while Todoroki noted that Bakugo had been the one eager to spy on them. Bakugo, frustrated, demanded to know how 𝗧𝗵𝗲 could possibly travel through time. As 𝗧𝗵𝗲 turned to speak with Naruto, the duo shrank back, hoping to remain unnoticed. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 extended his hand to Naruto, and the two boys shook hands, causing 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to appear bewildered as he suddenly found himself in a different place. Bakugo stood up, determined to follow 𝗧𝗵𝗲, while Todoroki hesitated but eventually joined him. They caught up to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, who was confused by their presence. Bakugo approached him, casually placing an arm around his shoulder and asking where he was headed. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 replied that he was going home, to which Bakugo suggested they accompany him. Todoroki informed them that their apartment was nearby, and he noted the differences between this 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and the one they knew. It seemed that 𝗧𝗵𝗲's quirk activated when he shook hands with Naruto, prompting a shared understanding between Todoroki and Bakugo. After escorting 𝗧𝗵𝗲 home, they returned to their apartment, greeted by the others. Todoroki captured their attention by announcing that they had made an important discovery. Denki, hopeful, asked if they had found a way back home, but Todoroki clarified that it was something much more significant. Midoriya, intrigued, pressed for details, and Todoroki revealed that they had encountered someone with a quirk. The group reacted with surprise, prompting 𝗧𝗲 to inquire about the individual's identity. Bakugo confirmed that it was the blonde boy named 𝗧𝗵𝗲, explaining that his quirk allowed him to travel 12 years into the past, and when he shook hands with another boy, he returned to his present timeline. Midoriya noted that since 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was from the future, his past self might be confused upon his return. 𝗧𝗲 raised concerns about the implications of this revelation, while Bakugo emphasized the need to ensure 𝗧𝗵𝗲's past self did not make any reckless decisions. The group acknowledged the challenge ahead and debated whether they should confront 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Denki suggested that if they did, they would need to wait for him to return before sharing their findings. Kirishima proposed that if revealing their identities would be beneficial, they should consider it. With a consensus reached, Todoroki nodded in agreement. Denki then raised his arms, revealing a black mask, indicating that they had a simple solution for concealing their faces. Midoriya expressed his longing to wear his hero mask. 𝗧𝗲 pointed him out, and Midoriya nodded in acknowledgement. Denki handed Todoroki a mask that was white on one side and black on the other, saying he made it for him. Todoroki appreciated the gesture, mentioning that he had his own mask in red, while Denki preferred to wear his hero glasses. Kirishima pointed at Denki, who explained that he thought the glasses would look good on him. 𝗧𝗲 then asked what the other two were planning to wear. Bakugo stood up, declaring that he didn't need a fancy mask since he could use the one from his hero costume, and he left the group. 𝗧𝗲 decided to wear one of the masks himself, pondering whether they should change their hairstyles. Denki agreed, and Kirishima joined in the discussion. The group spent the entire evening contemplating potential hair changes and how they would look. Kirishima felt a hand on his shoulder and turned around to see a stranger. The person apologized, explaining they thought he was someone else. Kirishima introduced himself, and the stranger returned the gesture, saying his name was Chifuyu Matsuno. Kaminari, a blonde with a black streak in his hair, bowed and introduced himself as well. He invited Chifuyu to join them, and Kirishima welcomed him with an arm around his shoulder. Chifuyu hesitated but eventually agreed to join them. As they walked, a raven-haired man wearing a mask approached, asking what was taking them so long. Kaminari introduced Chifuyu to Bakugo, who was initially skeptical but eventually acknowledged him. The group made their way to the park, where they often trained. Chifuyu noticed an ash-blonde male talking to a green-haired boy, who was engaged in a lively conversation with another dual-colored-haired individual. Bakugo, noticing the newcomers, inquired about their delay and expressed his impatience. Kaminari explained that they had brought Chifuyu along, and Bakugo seemed to accept him. Chifuyu watched as Bakugo and Kirishima sparred, evading each other's attacks. He questioned whether their training was just a series of brawls, to which Kaminari assured him that they had experienced much more challenging training back home. Curious, Chifuyu asked where they were from, and Kaminari replied that they were from Shizuoka. As they chatted, Chifuyu inquired about their presence in the area. Kaminari explained that they were there for family matters, mostly related to Todoroki, while the others were either working or on vacation. Chifuyu remarked that it seemed too early for a vacation, but Kaminari clarified that it wasn't that kind of vacation. Chifuyu observed that Bakugo and Kirishima appeared to be seasoned fighters, to which Kaminari confirmed they had been training since middle school. The group enjoyed their time with Chifuyu, and when it was time to part ways, he separated from them as they headed toward Takemichi's house. Kaminari wondered if Takemichi was back yet, noticing the lights on in his room. Shiro suggested they would find out the next day. Bakugo spotted Takemichi hiding behind a post, watching two unfamiliar males. Kirishima asked if Bakugo knew him, and Bakugo confirmed it was indeed Takemichi. He approached him, calling out to get his attention. Takemichi turned around, realizing he had been seen. Bakugo pulled him away from the hospital, unnoticed by the two strangers. He questioned Takemichi about what he was doing, and Takemichi explained he was just checking on something. Bakugo, not satisfied with the answer, quickened his pace, indicating that they had something important to discuss. As Takemichi caught up with Bakugo, Kirishima introduced himself, sharing his name with a friendly smile. Takemichi acknowledged him, and soon they reached the park, where he noticed others training together. Curious, he asked Kirishima if they were training, to which Kirishima nodded enthusiastically, explaining that they trained every day. Kirishima then pulled Takemichi toward the group, where Kaminari greeted him warmly, expressing how nice it was to see him again. Takemichi responded with an awkward smile, feeling a bit out of place. Shiro invited him to join their training, but Takemichi politely declined, feeling unprepared for such an activity. Kaminari, however, was persistent and pulled Takemichi closer to the training area. Takemichi leaned against a post, observing the group as they practiced. Unbeknownst to them, two individuals on a motorcycle were watching from a distance, one of them expressing interest in recruiting the group. The other reminded him that they needed to inform Draken first, questioning whether the group was already affiliated with a gang. As night fell, the group wasted no time in asking Takemichi about his quirk, knowing they might not have another chance. Midoriya was the first to speak, calling out to Takemichi and gaining his attention. Bakugo, blunt as ever, cut to the chase, revealing that they were aware of his time-traveling ability, much to Takemichi's surprise. He scratched his cheek, feigning ignorance, but Bakugo was not fooled. Midoriya tried to calm Bakugo, but the tension was palpable. Shiro explained that they had learned about Takemichi's quirk from Bakugo and Todoroki, reassuring him that they wouldn't share his secret. Kaminari then suggested they head to their apartment to share more about themselves. Takemichi, feeling a mix of confusion and apprehension, followed them, wondering what they meant. Once they arrived at the apartment, Takemichi sat on the sofa, nervously asking what they wanted to tell him. Bakugo headed to the kitchen while the others exchanged glances. Midoriya began to explain that they were not from this world, a statement that left Takemichi bewildered. They clarified that they were from a different universe, where quirks were akin to superpowers. Takemichi struggled to process this revelation, but they assured him they could explain everything. Denki sat beside him, expressing their longing to return home and offering their help in exchange for his assistance. Takemichi considered their proposal, agreeing to learn more about their world before revealing what he needed help with. With a serious expression, he encouraged them to share their story. Midoriya pulled out a notebook, ready to dive into the details of their quirks. The night passed with Takemichi absorbing information about their world while they learned about his future. Kaminari admired Takemichi's determination, and Kirishima praised his bravery. Takemichi, feeling a bit embarrassed, complimented their quirks in return. Bakugo, ever confident, declared his ambition to become the #1 hero. The following day, the group received alarming news from the hospital that Takemichi had been involved in a fight. They rushed to check on him, with Todoroki offering to cover his medical expenses. Upon entering Takemichi's room, they noticed a blonde girl who seemed unaware of their presence. Kaminari speculated that she might be 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 girlfriend, but 𝗧𝗏 cautioned against making assumptions. As they prepared to leave, they encountered Todoroki speaking with a short pink-haired girl, who expressed her gratitude to him. Bakugo called out to them, and Todoroki introduced the girl as Hinata, 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻's girlfriend. Confusion arose when Kaminari questioned the identity of the blonde girl in the room, leading to further speculation. After leaving the hospital, the group reflected on how long they had been in this world. Kirishima estimated it had been nearly a month, which surprised Kaminari. 𝗧𝗏 noted the time difference between their worlds, suggesting that tracking them would be difficult. Kirishima emphasized the importance of ensuring 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻's safety, and Midoriya proposed visiting his house the next day. They concluded their conversation, contemplating their next steps while considering a meal of soba. Kaminari looked at the group, especially at Todoroki, who nodded in agreement. They decided to head to a nearby yakisoba shop, settling at a table while they awaited their orders. Kaminari wondered aloud how they would return home after assisting 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻. 𝗧𝗏 suggested they might either be teleported or a portal could appear. Kaminari expressed his reluctance about entering a portal, but acknowledged that at least it would eliminate worries about their destination. Kirishima turned to Midoriya, who was busy jotting down the events 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 had shared. Kirishima asked what their next move should be. Midoriya explained that since 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 was currently in the hospital, it seemed he had tried to intervene in the conflict between Toumon and Moebius, but it hadn't worked out. 𝗧𝗏 inquired if they should join Toumon, the gang 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 was always associated with. Kirishima shrugged, agreeing that if it would help 𝗧𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻, they should consider it. Bakugo challenged them on how they planned to join Toumon, prompting Midoriya to think deeply as he wrote in his notebook. Kirishima pointed out that they could try to join before the significant event began. Shoto recalled their discussion about aliases and asked if they had come up with nicknames. The four of them nodded and shared their chosen names. Kirishima proudly declared himself Red Riot, 𝗧𝗏 opted for 𝗧𝗏, Kaminari chose Raiden, and Midoriya decided to stick with Deku. Bakugo, looking out of the restaurant, casually mentioned Dynamite, while Midoriya inquired about Todoroki's alias. After a moment of contemplation, Todoroki simply stated his first name, Shoto, leading Kirishima to smile and note that at least he wasn't alone in using his real name. Once they finished their meals, the group left the shop and returned to the hospital to check on 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻. They entered his room to find him sitting on the bed, gazing out the window. Bakugo asked what had happened, and 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 was surprised to see them. The following day, 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 was discharged, as his injuries were not life-threatening. The doctor advised him to be cautious to avoid further harm to his face or brain. The group accompanied him home and stayed for a week before returning to their apartment. Kaminari questioned whether they should keep their plans from 𝗧𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻. Bakugo dismissed the concern, suggesting it didn't matter if they told him. Kaminari countered that 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 would likely find out when he returned to the present, especially if they were joining a gang. 𝗧𝗏 reminded them that the date was just 2 days away, and Kaminari acknowledged that it made sense. Suddenly, someone called out from behind them. The group turned to see Chifuyu arriving on his bike. Midoriya expressed surprise at his presence. Chifuyu asked why they were out so late and explained that he had planned to attend a festival but his friend had cancelled. He invited them to join him instead. Without hesitation, Midoriya agreed, surprising the others. Chifuyu promised to meet them there before riding off. As the group continued toward their apartment, Kaminari suggested visiting 𝗧𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 again the next day. 𝗧𝗏 questioned the need to return so soon, but Kaminari reminded them that the big day was approaching. The next day, they visited 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻, who was shouting at a group running away from him. Bakugo called out to grab his attention, and 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 greeted them with a smile. Kirishima pointed to the broken items scattered in front of 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻's house and asked what had happened. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 frowned as he explained that Draken and Mikey had fought, resulting in the destruction of his belongings. He held up the handle of his cherished skateboard, 𝐒𝐻𝐢, and lamented its condition. Kaminari picked up the 2 broken pieces of the skateboard, piecing them together as he expressed sympathy. 𝗧𝗏 asked why 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 smelled, to which 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 sheepishly admitted he had a mishap with a mess in his hair. Kaminari stepped back in surprise and urged him to take a shower. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 sat down, feeling misunderstood and upset. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 knelt in front of him, holding up the skateboard handle and calmly suggested that 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 take a shower while they cleaned up the mess. This unexpected kindness caught everyone off guard. 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 nodded in gratitude and headed inside his house. Quirkless took the initiative to pick up one of the broken items, while Kaminari looked at the skateboard pieces and asked where they should dispose of them. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 entered 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸's house to grab a trash bag. Once he returned, they collected the broken items and disposed of them in a trash pile across the street, waiting for 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 to come back out. They expressed their gratitude for the support they had shown him. 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 smiled at his friends as they headed toward the park, where the others were likely gathered. Midoriya turned to him, returning the smile. Upon reaching the park, they spotted 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸's friends along with two blonde-haired males. The first was slightly shorter than Midoriya, while the other was taller than Todoroki and sported a dragon tattoo on the side of his head. Yamagishi called out to 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸, who greeted the group with enthusiasm. His friends pulled him into their circle, while the two blonde males observed the newcomers. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 ignored their gazes and leaned against the monkey bars, with Kirishima, Denki, and 𝗬𝗪 joining him. Midoriya and Todoroki followed closely behind 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸. The taller male inquired about the group, and the shorter one nodded, commenting on their interesting nature. The taller male reminded him to refrain from using a particular nickname in public, but the shorter one dismissed it, opting to play with a soccer ball instead. As they played, two girls from a previous encounter arrived at the park. Hina, the pink-haired girl, expressed her surprise at seeing them again and greeted Todoroki, who responded with a nod and a small smile. 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸, curious, asked Hina if she knew them. She confirmed that they were the ones who had helped at the hospital and then turned to the group, realizing she hadn't learned their names. Midoriya introduced himself first, inviting her to call him Deku. Kirishima followed suit, flashing a bright smile, while Kaminari playfully winked at her. 𝗬𝗪 introduced himself next, and 𝗵𝘃𝗲 stated his name with disinterest. The blonde-haired girl, Emma, noted a resemblance to someone named Draken and introduced herself. Midoriya nodded, pleased to meet her. Hina then asked what they had been playing, to which the shorter male responded that they were playing soccer. He demonstrated some tricks with the ball, but when he kicked it too hard, it nearly hit Mikoto in the face. Midoriya made a quick catch, earning praise from Kirishima. Midoriya reminisced about the good old days as he showcased his own skills with the ball. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 called out for a pass, and the shorter male dashed toward Midoriya, who kicked the ball to him. The group joined in the game, while the girls watched from the sidelines. They spent the afternoon playing soccer and getting to know one another, learning that the two blonde males were the president and vice president of a biker gang called 𝗬𝗏. Mikey, the president, turned to the group with a smile, expressing that they were fun. Kaminari agreed, and Mikey felt a sense of trust toward them, despite just meeting that day. He glanced at Draken, who was chatting with Emma, before waving goodbye to the group as he walked over to them. Kirishima nodded as they watched Mikey leave. Once he was out of sight, the group turned their attention to 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸, who was still talking to Hina. Kaminari called out to 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸, signaling that it was time to go. 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 and Hina turned their heads in their direction, and 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 replied with a smile before they all nodded and departed from the park, making their way back to the apartment. The day of the festival arrived, and the group gathered at the entrance, having arrived earlier than expected due to a mix of excitement and nerves about the evening ahead. Kaminari expressed his anxiety, prompting 𝗵𝘃𝗲 to tease him about being a coward, which led to Kaminari defensively insisting otherwise. Chifuyu arrived on his bike, apologizing for being late. Midoriya welcomed him with a smile, and they entered the festival, heading toward a booth. Chifuyu noticed Todoroki gazing at the booths in awe and asked if it was his first time at such an event. Todoroki confirmed that it was, explaining that his father had kept him sheltered during most of his childhood. Chifuyu offered to show them around, and Kaminari eagerly accepted. As they walked, Chifuyu explained the festival's purpose while Kaminari indulged in snacks. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 and Kirishima engaged in friendly competitions at various booths. Chifuyu turned to Todoroki, noting his quiet demeanor. Todoroki admitted he wasn't accustomed to interacting with people outside his family. Chifuyu smiled, thanking Todoroki for joining him and expressing his enjoyment of the evening. Just then, they heard someone call 𝗬𝗪𝗈's name and turned to see 𝗧𝗪𝗏 and 𝗵𝗲 approaching. 𝗬𝗪𝗈 greeted them warmly, and the group paused, realizing they had encountered 𝗵𝗲 and 𝗧𝗪𝗏 again. 𝗬𝗪𝗈 asked if it was just the two of them, to which 𝗵𝗲 replied that 𝗧𝗵𝐵𝐺 and hyena were also present. myheroacademia greeted 𝗵𝗲, who returned the sentiment with a smile. 𝗧𝗵𝐵𝐺, upon joining the group with hyena, expressed surprise that they hadn't mentioned attending the festival. 𝗧𝗏 explained that it had been a last-minute invitation, and hyena smiled as they prepared to part ways, wishing each other well. Kaminari pointed out a set of booths they hadn't explored yet, prompting 𝗧𝗏 to cheer and run toward them. Kirishima followed, dragging Bakugo along. Midoriya observed that they would be splitting up and noticed 𝗬𝗪𝗈 checking his phone. Midoriya inquired if everything was all right, and 𝗬𝗪𝗈 explained that he had somewhere to be. Midoriya assured him that they would likely head home after checking out the booths, and 𝗬𝗪𝗈 bid them farewell, promising to see them later. 𝗬𝗪𝗈 took the lead, rushing toward the entrance to retrieve his bike. The duo followed closely behind, joining the others as they sprinted toward the forest where they last spotted 𝗧𝗵𝗏, puzzled by their destination. Kaminari expressed concern about their situation as they navigated through the trees. Kirishima pointed out a shrine in the distance, suggesting they investigate. The group hurried toward it, finding the area empty. Midoriya scanned the surroundings and noted their absence. Kirishima proposed checking nearby, and they all agreed. As they exited the shrine, Kaminari hesitated about splitting up, but Midoriya confidently stated he had an idea of where to find them, prompting the group to follow him as he took off running. Bakugo questioned Midoriya's certainty, to which he nodded, leading them to a parking lot that also appeared deserted. Suddenly, they heard a noise nearby. Kirishima directed their attention toward it, and they dashed in that direction. Upon reaching the parking lot, they spotted 𝗧𝗵𝗏 and 𝗧𝗪𝗏 standing a few meters away from a group of men dressed in white, with one figure in black at the forefront. Beside 𝗧𝗵𝗏 and 𝗧𝗪𝗏 stood a man with short silver lilac hair, and 𝗵𝗲, who noticed their arrival. Denki inquired if they were facing Moebius, while 𝗵𝗲 rushed toward them, gripping her umbrella tightly and looking anxious. Bakugo instructed Kaminari to look after her, catching him off guard. The group's attention shifted as they heard a bike approaching. Kirishima spotted Mikey, who stopped between Moebius and the trio. Mikey dismounted and approached the man in black, while 𝗧𝗏 urged the group to assist 𝗵𝗲. The masked figures did not recognize them, but 𝗧𝗵𝗏 greeted the group, prompting Kirishima to wave. Bakugo asked if they needed help, smirking beneath his mask. The silver lilac-haired man inquired about their identities, and 𝗧𝗵𝗏 introduced them as his friends. Before they could continue, Mikey attempted to kick the new guy, only for his strike to be blocked, leaving the group surprised. The silver lilac-haired man sighed, noting the arrival of more bikes in the distance. As the newcomers parked, the group shielded their eyes from the bright lights. Midoriya speculated if it was Tamon, and the new arrivals slowly approached. The leader remarked on the situation, expressing that infighting wasn't his preference but they were ready to confront Moebius. Another member, with peach-colored hair and a cheerful demeanor, emphasized the significance of the impending showdown. Mikey acknowledged the group, and the long-haired member informed them that the entire Tokyo Manji gang had arrived. The group exchanged smiles, while Bakugo seemed intrigued by the unfolding events. The peach-haired member playfully challenged anyone to step forward, and Bakugo responded with determination. 𝗬𝗪𝗈 smiled at his friends, and they nodded in unison, turning their focus back to Moebius. 𝗧𝗪𝗏 remarked on the excitement of a brawl during the festival, walking toward Mikey, who chuckled in agreement. 𝗧𝗵𝗏 expressed his worry, prompting Midoriya to place a reassuring hand on his shoulder. 𝗧𝗵𝗏 looked surprised, but Midoriya assured him they would manage. With Mikey's signal, they charged toward the opposing gang, who mirrored their actions. As the brawl erupted, the group struggled to keep track of 𝗧𝗵𝗏, who seemed to vanish amidst the chaos. Bakugo found himself back-to-back with the peach-haired member, who maintained his cheerful expression. The peach-haired member complimented Bakugo's hair, and Bakugo responded with a smirk before launching an attack on a Moebius member. Amidst the fight, Bakugo's fierce spirit shone through as he took down opponents. Meanwhile, Midoriya and 𝗬𝗪𝗈 worked together, surrounded by Moebius members. Midoriya urgently asked 𝗂𝗓𝗓 about Draken's whereabouts, emphasizing its importance. 𝗂𝗓𝗓 responded while engaging in combat, and Midoriya continued to fight valiantly, kicking and punching their adversaries. Kirishima and 𝗧𝗏 had each other's backs, enjoying the thrill of the battle. 𝗧𝗏 remarked on the fun of the fight, while Kirishima joked about the absence of quirks among their opponents. Todoroki found himself surrounded but remained composed, facing the taunts of the opposing group. The atmosphere was charged with energy as the fight continued, each member determined to protect their friends and stand against Moebius. Todoroki remained silent as he swiftly kicked one assailant in the stomach and struck another in the face, leaving the onlookers stunned. His expression remained neutral. Meanwhile, Kaminari stood guard over 𝗵𝗲, as several members of Moebius approached, underestimating him. He urged 𝗵𝗲 to stay back, positioning his arm protectively in front of her while eyeing the advancing group. One of the attackers charged at him, but Kaminari countered with a punch to the face. Though he had faced villains before, fighting without using his quirk felt unfamiliar, especially against someone deemed quirkless in their world. Despite his nerves, he had to push through. After all, they had promised 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to help him. Kaminari heard 𝗧𝗵𝗲 call out for Draken, which made him glance in the direction of the sound, but the chaos of the fight obstructed his view. Frustrated, he cursed under his breath. Just then, 𝗧𝗏 appeared, landing a kick on a Moebius member and positioning himself in front of Kaminari and 𝗵𝗲. He checked in on Kaminari, who nodded in response. 𝗧𝗏 then pointed out that they needed to back up their friends and dashed toward the fray, delivering a punch to another opponent. 𝗵𝗲, understanding the urgency, decided to split off, stating she would search for Hina. Kaminari and 𝗧𝗏 exchanged glances before he urged her to be careful and then joined 𝗧𝗏 in the thick of the battle. As Moebius members tried to overwhelm 𝗧𝗵𝗲, Todoroki and Midoriya arrived to assist. Todoroki instructed 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to go while he engaged an attacker with a punch. Midoriya confirmed his readiness, and together they fought back against the Moebius members. Despite his smaller stature, Midoriya managed to take down multiple opponents at once, prompting one of the Moebius members to comment on his strength. Bakugo joined the fray, kicking one of the attackers from behind and then delivering a punch to another nearby. He taunted them for their weakness. When he heard Midoriya call out to him, Bakugo shot him a glare before dealing with another assailant. He inquired about the whereabouts of their extra member, to which Midoriya replied that he was taking Draken to the hospital. Bakugo expressed his concern, stating that Draken better make it back safely. As the fight concluded with Toumon emerging victorious, the Moebius gang scattered upon hearing police sirens approaching. Mikey quickly headed for his bike to follow the ambulance transporting Draken. Midoriya gathered the others, instructing them to follow. 𝗂𝗓𝗓, observing their swift departure, asked where they were headed. Midoriya explained their intention to follow Mikey, surprising 𝗂𝗓𝗓 with their speed. The group arrived at the hospital, waiting outside to avoid interfering with the situation inside. Kaminari wondered if they should go in, but Bakugo reminded him that this was not their problem. 𝗧𝗏 suggested they wait at a nearby boba shop, pointing it out across the street. The group agreed and entered the shop, ordering drinks while the cashier raised an eyebrow at their bruised appearances. Kaminari suggested they head home to clean up, but Midoriya insisted they wait for 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to discuss their next steps. After about 30 minutes, they spotted 𝗧𝗵𝗲 exiting the hospital and approached him. He was surprised to see them, thinking they had left. Midoriya explained they needed to know his next move. Kaminari offered him his boba, which 𝗧𝗵𝗲 accepted and took a sip. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 mentioned he would report to Naruto the following day. Kaminari encouraged him to keep the drink, insisting it was fine. As they left 𝗧𝗵𝗲 at the hospital, Kaminari pondered whether they should wait for an invitation. Kirishima confirmed they would wait for 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to reach out. 2 weeks had passed since the fight with Moebius, and the group had been closely monitoring 𝗧𝗵𝗲's past self, as the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 they knew had returned to the present. Midoriya expressed his impatience, noting that 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was taking his time. Kirishima suggested they spar, placing an arm around Midoriya, who opted to watch alongside 𝗧𝗏. Bakugo challenged Todoroki, who simply regarded him. 𝗧𝗏 proposed they team up, which Bakugo found appealing. Kirishima agreed, and they prepared for the match. 𝗧𝗏 counted them down, and the pairs launched into action, Bakugo targeting Midoriya while Todoroki faced Kirishima. As the fight unfolded, Kaminari and 𝗧𝗏 observed the intensity of the battle. Their sparring was interrupted when Mikey and Draken arrived at the park. Bakugo had Midoriya pinned down while Todoroki and Kirishima exchanged blows. 𝗧𝗏 whispered to Kaminari, acknowledging their timely arrival. Mikey raised his hand in greeting, acknowledging Chifuyu, who appeared behind Draken. The group turned to see the short male with silver lilac hair alongside a peach-haired individual and a guy with a similar hairstyle, but in blue. The latter had a contrasting expression compared to the peach-haired male. Midoriya stepped out of Bakugo's grip and greeted them, expressing relief at seeing everyone safe. 𝗧𝗏 and Kaminari approached, curious about the newcomers. Kirishima placed an arm around Bakugo and asked what had brought them there. Chifuyu smiled and informed them that Mikey had something to share. Mitsuya, the second division's captain, was introduced by Chifuyu, who animatedly gestured in front of him. Mitsuya, slightly embarrassed, remarked that such an introduction wasn't necessary. Chifuyu continued, introducing Smiley, the fourth division's captain, and his twin brother, Angry, the vice-captain. Smiley greeted the group, and 𝗧𝗏 noted the twins' resemblance, while Kaminari commented on it being quite obvious. Mikey smiled and extended his hand, inviting them to join Tamon, which surprised the group. Midoriya was the first to accept, shaking Mikey's hand, and Draken welcomed them with a smirk. Chifuyu then took Midoriya by the hand, leading him away. They arrived at a nearby parking lot filled with bikes. Kaminari asked about Mikey's bike, to which Bakugo retorted that he should have noticed it during their previous encounter with Moebius. Kaminari explained he had been too focused on remembering names and faces. Kirishima inquired about their destination, and Chifuyu replied that they were heading to get uniforms made. He handed Midoriya a helmet, stating he would ride with him. Draken asked if anyone else knew how to ride, and Bakugo simply hopped onto Mikey's bike, while Kirishima joined him. Mitsuya offered to take Todoroki, who complied silently, and Smiley turned to Denki, who nodded in agreement. 𝗧𝗏 approached Angry's bike and donned the helmet he was given. Once everyone was ready, they set off. Kaminari exclaimed how awesome it was as he took in the sights of the city. Smiley asked if it was his first time, and Kaminari confirmed it. With a smirk, he suggested a race, and Smiley nodded in agreement, speeding up. Kaminari challenged the others to race, prompting them to accelerate as well. Mikey urged Draken to go faster, while Draken reminded him to stop calling him by that nickname in public. Midoriya expressed concern about the speed, but Chifuyu was already speeding ahead. Bakugo joined in, and Angry drove past Mitsuya and Todoroki, who were more cautious. 𝗧𝗏 cheered for Angry, while Mitsuya warned them about the risks of such reckless driving. The group quickly reached their destination, with Smiley and Kaminari finishing first, followed by Chifuyu and Midoriya, Bakugo and Kirishima in third, Draken and Mikey in fourth, and Angry and 𝗧𝗏 in fifth. Mitsuya and Todoroki, choosing not to race, arrived last. Kaminari teased Todoroki about being no fun, and Mitsuya led them inside the building. Smiley informed the others to follow Mitsuya while they waited outside. Inside, they found a man sewing clothes, who greeted Mitsuya and inquired about their visit. Mitsuya explained he wanted to arrange uniforms for the group. The man nodded and instructed them to follow him. He asked when they needed the uniforms, and Mitsuya replied they could wait until next month. The man agreed to prepare them by then. Midoriya quickly emerged from behind a curtain, having completed his fitting. Mitsuya complimented his efficiency, and they discussed their plans for a meal. Mitsuya suggested they eat after the fitting, but Midoriya hesitated, insisting it wasn't necessary. Mitsuya reassured him, noting that Mikey was likely hungry too. After everyone finished their adjustments, they exited the building to find the others waiting. Mitsuya announced it was time to go, and Mikey asked if they were heading to eat. Mitsuya confirmed, and Mikey playfully called Draken by his nickname again, prompting Draken to shake his head. They made their way to a restaurant and placed their orders. Smiley inquired about who would pay, and Mitsuya suggested they split the bill. Todoroki surprised everyone by pulling out a black credit card, explaining it had been given to him by his father. The others were taken aback, especially Kaminari, who knew the story behind it. Angry asked if it was all right, and 𝗧𝗏 confirmed it was fine, noting that Todoroki often covered their outings. Once the food arrived, they enjoyed their meal and engaged in lively conversation. Afterward, Todoroki paid the bill, leaving the waitress astonished by the card. Kaminari declared he was full, and 𝗧𝗏 playfully pointed out he had eaten too much. As night fell, Smiley remarked on the time, and they prepared to leave, realizing it was time to part ways. Mitsuya turned to his friends, mentioning they would meet again on the 20th of October before they drove off. The group began walking back, and Kaminari suggested visiting Takemichi while gazing up at the sky. Midoriya confirmed that was indeed their destination. Kirishima wondered what was taking Takemichi so long to return, and Bakugo speculated that he was likely being lectured by Naoto. 𝗧𝗏 agreed, and they decided to hurry along. Kirishima teased Bakugo about his resemblance to the Kawata twins, prompting Bakugo to glare at Kaminari, who quickly hid behind 𝗧𝗏. 𝗧𝗏 urged Kaminari to stop provoking Bakugo, while Kirishima commented on Bakugo's demeanor, noting that he could easily be mistaken for their third twin. Bakugo, annoyed, signaled for the others to run, chasing after them while calling them idiots. Kirishima decided to follow suit. Midoriya and Todoroki continued walking, discussing how they would proceed without the others. They were on a mission to buy food for Takemichi, who had been staying at his house since the Takemichi they knew returned to their timeline. Todoroki remarked on how long Takemichi was taking, and Midoriya wondered about the current situation in the future now that Draken had been saved. They reached the mall and headed straight for the grocery section, determined to focus on their task. Midoriya pondered what to get for Takemichi, while Todoroki pushed the cart behind him. Meanwhile, Bakugo, Kirishima, 𝗧𝗏, and Kaminari had run off course and paused to catch their breath. Kaminari decided to sit down, expressing concern about getting lost. Bakugo caught up with them, smirking as he approached. The two friends exchanged worried glances, apologizing to Bakugo and pleading for mercy. Bakugo grabbed Kaminari by the collar, dragging him back to their original path, instructing him to stop whining and walk. 𝗧𝗏 followed, placing an arm around Kaminari and commenting on how close they had come to trouble. Kirishima called out from a distance, warning them to hurry or he would leave without them. The two quickly ran after Bakugo, who was already ahead. After shopping for groceries, the group split up, with Bakugo's team heading home while Todoroki and Midoriya explored the city, hoping to spot more classmates. Midoriya expressed his hope that they were the only ones there, and Todoroki reassured him. They wandered around before deciding to relax in a nearby park, enjoying the peaceful moment. Midoriya reflected on missing being a hero but found comfort in the tranquility. They sat on swings, the park empty except for the two of them. Todoroki eventually decided to head back, suspecting Bakugo and the others were slacking off. Midoriya stood up, ready to return, and Todoroki smiled as he watched him run off. The next month, the group gathered at the shop where their uniforms were made. Mitsuya was already there with a taller companion, whose shaved head revealed hints of blue hair. Mitsuya welcomed them and instructed his friend, Hakai, to stay put while he brought the new members inside. The group followed Mitsuya and saw a man waiting for them, who gestured toward a table. After thanking him, Mitsuya urged everyone to try on their uniforms. They changed in stalls, with Todoroki emerging first, looking great in his outfit. Midoriya, Denki, and 𝗧𝗏 followed, while Bakugo and Kirishima were last. Once they were done, they placed their uniforms in plastic bags and left the shop. Mitsuya reminded them to wear the uniforms on the date Mikey had mentioned and to head to the shrine. As they made their way to Takemichi's house, they entered without knocking and went straight to his room. Since they had shared their quirks and learned about his secret, they developed a routine to ensure the past Takemichi wouldn't make any reckless decisions. They could tell if it was the Takemichi they knew based on his reactions upon seeing them. Bakugo expressed his hope that it would be him this time as Kirishima opened the door to Takemichi's room. Takemichi was seated at a table, working on a puzzle, and greeted them as he placed a piece in its spot. The group exchanged glances and settled down beside him. Kirishima presented a plastic bag, saying they had brought something for him. Takemichi opened it, surprised by the contents, and Bakugo asked if he had stayed put. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 confirmed he had. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 expressed his reluctance to leave the house that day as he opened a cup of soba from the plastic bag. Denki offered to get the water and stood up to leave the room. Todoroki and 𝗧𝗏 were engrossed in assembling a puzzle, oblivious to the conversation around them. 𝗧𝗏 complimented Todoroki on his impressive speed in putting together 20 pieces, to which Todoroki simply acknowledged with a nod. The group had decided to stay at 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻's house for the night, debating whether to return to their apartment. Ultimately, they chose to remain, leaving 3 days before the announcement of their new membership in 𝗃𝗏. They spent the day indoors, reflecting on their situation. Denki pointed out that something seemed off about Todoroki, prompting 𝗧𝗏 to ask for clarification. Denki leaned back on the sofa, suggesting that Todoroki felt different than before. Bakugo interjected, implying that Denki's lack of interaction with Todoroki led him to perceive the change. 𝗧𝗏 agreed, and Midoriya suggested that Todoroki was simply enjoying his time, given their uncertain future. Kirishima speculated about Todoroki's recent outings, wondering what he was up to. Bakugo remarked that Todoroki was likely exploring and learning things he hadn't experienced before. He noted that Todoroki wasn't the type to venture out much as a child. Midoriya was surprised by Bakugo's insight, but Bakugo dismissed the question, insisting they should let Todoroki be. He believed Todoroki would tire himself out once he discovered everything the world had to offer. The group agreed to ask Todoroki about it when they had the chance. Denki then shifted the conversation to the possibility of buying their own bikes now that they were part of 𝗃𝗏, to which 𝗧𝗏 shrugged in response. In the future, on October 20, 2017, Naruto checked on 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻, who seemed lost in thought. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 confirmed he was alright but called Naruto's name, prompting Naruto to ask what was wrong. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 revealed that a group of people knew about his time-leaping ability. Naruto reacted with concern, wanting to know who they were. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 reassured him that they were trustworthy and had helped him, but Naruto cautioned him to ensure they wouldn't betray him. As the day of the meeting approached, the group prepared themselves. Midoriya donned his hero mask, resting it on his neck, while Bakugo wore his mask atop his head. Kirishima sported a red mask they had made a month prior, and Todoroki wore a black and white mask. 𝗧𝗏 had a bandana loosely tied around his neck, and Denki wore a black mask with his hero glasses perched on his head. They all wore 𝗃𝗏 uniforms as they headed toward the shrine, though Bakugo wore his uniform in a casual manner, with an orange tank top visible beneath it. Kirishima and 𝗧𝗏 also wore their uniforms loosely, while Todoroki kept his uniform neat but left 2 buttons undone. Midoriya wore a green hoodie beneath his uniform, and Denki was the only one wearing his uniform correctly. Unlike the other gang members, the group, except for 𝗧𝗏 and Denki, opted for their hero boots instead of the standard white ones. Bakugo wore his signature black boots with orange soles, Todoroki had his white boots, Kirishima wore his usual boots, and Midoriya sported his iconic red shoes, which he wore with everything. The group quickly reached the shrine, where they saw gang members filling the parking lot with their bikes. They stealthily made their way to the top of the shrine, waiting for Mikey and the others. Denki wondered about their next move, while Bakugo expressed a longing to finish quickly. Kirishima hoped they would engage in more than just fighting this time. 𝗧𝗏 voiced concern about their appearance, feeling they didn't fit in with the other gang members. Denki reassured him that everything would be fine. Midoriya quietly pondered what would happen next, drawing the group's attention. They watched as gang members began lining up, confident that they remained unseen in the shadows. The sound of approaching bikes signaled it was time to prepare. Mikey and the others appeared from the stairs, greeted by the other gang members with bows. Mikey stood at the front, flanked by Draken, who announced the official appointment of the new 3rd Division captain of the Tokyo Manji gang. Whispers spread among the gang members as 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 appeared lost in thought, standing behind Mitsuya, signaling that he was ready for what was to come. Mikey announced as the group observed the crowd of gang members waiting for someone to step forward. They noticed 2 figures slowly making their way through the throng. One wore glasses, and his hairstyle resembled 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻's. The guy with glasses locked eyes with 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 for a brief moment before continuing to the front. He stood before Mikey and then sat on the flight of stairs, prompting whispers among the other members about his behavior. The guy who walked with him to the front introduced him as the new 3rd Division captain, Teta Kisaki. Bakugo smirked from behind, commenting that Kisaki didn't appear very menacing. Denki, earning curious glances, remarked that one shouldn't judge by appearances. 𝗧𝗏, placing an arm around Denki, warned him not to be deceived. 𝗧𝗵𝐴 suddenly felt a chill run down his spine as he gazed at Kisaki. Kirishima noted that 𝗧𝗵𝐴 must be feeling quite angry at that moment. The group listened to the other members grumble about Kisaki, learning that he belonged to the rival gang they had fought before the crowd began to chant disapprovingly. Draken shouted for silence, challenging anyone with a problem regarding Mikey's decision to step forward. Denki turned to Bakugo, who smirked, and they both agreed it was time to take action. 𝗧𝗏 suggested they put on their masks. Draken stepped aside as Mikey took the stage once more, announcing that new members would be joining them. The group made their way to the front, and the other gang members whispered among themselves upon seeing them. They formed a line in front of Mikey, who declared that they would be joining 𝗵𝗏 starting that day. Midoriya, Denki, Kirishima, and 𝗧𝗏 enthusiastically greeted the crowd, while Bakugo and Todoroki followed without much fanfare. 𝗧𝗵𝐴 observed the newcomers, noting how different they appeared from the rest, though their hairstyles reminded him of some familiar faces. He pushed that thought aside and focused on Kisaki. Mikey explained that each division would receive one of the new members, starting with the 1st division. 𝗧𝗏 and Denki were assigned to the 5th division led by Mucho, Bakugo to the 4th led by 𝗬𝗠𝗠𝗠, Kirishima to the 3rd division now led by Kisaki, Midoriya to the 2nd division led by Mitsuya, and Todoroki to the 1st led by Baji. Mikey continued his speech, stating that they would eventually clash with Valhalla. The group exchanged glances before looking at 𝗧𝗵𝐴, who seemed to radiate a different aura. Mikey emphasized that 𝗵𝗏 needed to grow to defeat Valhalla and that they would need Kisaki for the fight. As Mikey concluded, the group watched Kisaki put on a display that made Bakugo click his tongue in annoyance. They turned to 𝗧𝗵𝐴, who appeared troubled. Bakugo muttered that if he were in 𝗧𝗵𝐴's position, he would have confronted Kisaki directly. Suddenly, 𝗧𝗵𝐴 charged at Kisaki and landed a punch on him, surprising everyone. Denki remarked on the force of the blow, while Midoriya expressed that he would have done the same. Draken shouted at 𝗧𝗵𝐴, but the group was more concerned about the division captains approaching him. A tall guy with long black hair, Baji, confronted 𝗧𝗵𝐴, while Chifuyu called out to him, causing Midoriya to look back and forth between them. In a sudden turn of events, Baji punched 𝗧𝗵𝐴, but Mitsuya intervened, scolding Baji. Baji then turned to Mikey, announcing his intention to leave for Valhalla, prompting Mikey to call after him. Baji declared he would quit before walking away from the gathering, which was abruptly dismissed. The group regrouped at the bottom of the stairs. Todoroki told them to go ahead, stating he would meet them back at the apartment before leaving the parking lot. Denki remarked on the unusual situation as they watched Todoroki depart. Bakugo expressed his longing to leave, not wanting to see Kisaki's face any longer. Midoriya hesitated, concerned about 𝗧𝗵𝐴, but Bakugo told him to stay if he wished, before walking off with Kirishima, Denki, and 𝗧𝗏. Midoriya took one last look up the stairs before hurrying after them. Meanwhile, Todoroki was in the city with Baji, who advised him not to reveal his affiliation with 𝗵𝗏. Todoroki quickly removed his uniform and tied it around his waist, taking off his mask as he followed Baji into an alley where they encountered a guy with yellow highlights in his hair wearing a white jacket. Baji greeted him, and the guy smirked, introducing himself as Kazutora. The following day, Todoroki headed to 𝗧𝗵𝐴's school with Kazutora, dressed in a black hoodie. 2 middle school students trailed behind them as they entered the school just as the bell rang, signaling the end of the day. They walked to the 2nd floor, passing students who stared and whispered. Kazutora approached 2 girls at their classroom door, asking about 𝗧𝗵𝐴's class. One girl, still confused, informed him that 𝗧𝗵𝐴 was in class 3. Kazutora thanked her and continued on his way, with Todoroki following closely behind. Wearing a black mask and with his hood up, Todoroki was cautious not to reveal his presence, aware that the students might inform others about their visit. He watched as Kazutora opened a classroom door and stepped inside, leaning against the doorframe to observe. Inside, He saw 𝗧𝗵𝐵𝐺 and his friends looking at them. Kazutora moved further into the room, and Todoroki noticed what appeared to be gang names on the board, spotting Toumon written among them. Kazutora then asked if school was already over, prompting Mikoto to stand up and approach him, questioning who he was. The unfamiliar student questioned Todoroki's presence, noting it was impolite to not recognize him as a senior in the school. Todoroki couldn't discern whether the student was annoyed or simply indifferent. The student, Mikoto, expressed his confusion, having never seen Todoroki before. Yamagishi approached them, his expression shifting to one of surprise as he spotted the tiger tattoo on Todoroki's neck. He urged Mikoto to stop, revealing that the person they were speaking to was significant. When Kazutora casually asked if they knew Takemichi Hanagaki, Yamagishi turned to confirm that indeed, Takemichi was present. Kazutora then introduced himself as Valhalla's number 3, which left the others in shock. Kazutora excitedly ran to Takemichi and embraced him, expressing his happiness at discovering someone from Toumon who was a grade below him. After releasing Takemichi, Kazutora placed his hands on his shoulders and suggested they head to Valhalla's hideout. As they passed Todoroki, Takemichi appeared surprised and confused by the mention of Valhalla. Kazutora announced that he had found Takemichi, prompting Takemichi to glance at the injured students accompanying them. Todoroki observed the scene, noting how everyone flinched upon realizing he was there. As Takemichi approached Kazutora and the two middle schoolers, Yamagishi greeted Todoroki. Kazutora urged Takemichi to hurry, and Todoroki followed behind them, noticing his friends peeking out from behind him. Kazutora reassured Takemichi that he would introduce him to everyone. They exited the school and made their way into the city, with Todoroki walking alongside Takemichi while the middle schoolers startled a student in a dark blue blazer. Todoroki reflected on how he ended up in this situation, recalling his meeting with Baji in a park. When Midoriya had left to gather others for a final check around Shibuya and nearby cities, Baji approached him, commenting on the pleasant weather before introducing himself as Toumon's 1st Division captain. Todoroki remembered Mitsuya's words about Baji and Chifuyu, the vice-captain of the 1st Division, and how Mitsuya had advised him to form his own opinion. After Baji's introduction, he shared his concerns about Valhalla and his plans to confront Kisaki. Initially puzzled by Baji's openness, Todoroki quickly understood when Baji asked for his assistance, which he readily accepted. Baji instructed him to meet after Toumon's meeting on October 20th, and now here he was, heading to Valhalla's hideout with Takemichi and Kazutora. Baji had specifically requested that he keep this a secret, believing Todoroki to be the only one capable of handling the situation. Todoroki smiled at the memory, feeling a sense of duty as a hero to help those in need. He listened to the conversation between Kazutora and Takemichi, who pointed out that they were almost at their destination. Todoroki noticed a headless angel painted on the wall beside the entrance as they approached the building. They paused, and Takemichi looked up, questioning if they were entering the right place. Kazutora confirmed they were at the arcade, which had been closed for a long time. Ignoring the no trespassing sign, Kazutora led the way inside, with Takemichi following closely behind. Todoroki surveyed the interior, observing that the gang members were clad in white jackets featuring the headless angel emblem. They ventured further in, where a crowd had gathered around 4 individuals on a mini-stage. Todoroki caught sight of Baji engaged in a fierce struggle with Chifuyu, who was pinned beneath him. Takemichi, visibly shocked, turned to Kazutora for an explanation. Kazutora explained that it was a loyalty test for Baji, who needed to prove his commitment to Valhalla by demonstrating his readiness to abandon Toumon. Todoroki watched as Baji continued to strike Chifuyu, whose face was blooded. Kazutora clarified that Chifuyu was Toumon's 1st squad vice-captain and Baji's most trusted ally. As Baji paused to assess the situation, he turned to one of the individuals on the mini-stage, questioning if his actions were sufficient for initiation into Valhalla. The man smiled, revealing tattoos on his hands that symbolized sin and punishment, indicating the weight of Baji's decision. The guy on the far right was munching on a bag of chips and expressed his admiration for the distance they had come. The guy on the left, sporting a tattoo on the left side of his face, acknowledged this with a nod. Baji, feeling impatient, stated that he hadn't come to hear any lectures. 𝗵𝗲 then stood up and called out to 𝗧𝗪𝗃, who responded affirmatively. 𝗵𝗲 inquired if 𝗧𝗪𝗃 had captured someone, to which 𝗧𝗪𝗃 confirmed that they had brought in 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻 Hanagaki, the new member of 𝗏𝗏𝗏. As 𝗧𝗪𝗃 turned to 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻, the latter felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. 𝗵𝗲 jumped down from the mini-stage and approached the group, addressing 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻 directly. He commanded him to step forward, and Todoroki pushed him, causing 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻 to stumble slightly as he regained his balance beside 𝗏𝗏𝗏. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 looked at him and remarked that 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻 had come from a different time and questioned if he was seeking trouble. The gang members began chanting for 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻's demise, and Todoroki observed as 𝗵𝗲 raised his hand, returning to the mini-stage. 𝗵𝗲 introduced 𝗏𝗏𝗏 as one of 𝗏𝗏𝗏's founding members and the first squad captain, revealing 𝗏𝗏𝗏's intention to abandon 𝗏𝗏𝗏 for Valhalla. The other members began to murmur among themselves, and 𝗵𝗲 agreed that this was a serious issue. He proclaimed that enlisting 𝗏𝗏𝗏 would significantly aid their efforts against 𝗏𝗏𝗏. Todoroki glanced at 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻, then at 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and 𝗧𝗪𝗃, pondering their connections. 𝗵𝗲 continued, stating that they needed to address a potential issue. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 might be a spy for 𝗏𝗏𝗏. He mentioned that 𝗧𝗪𝗃 had prepared a witness for this situation, which seemed to ease 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻's tension. 𝗵𝗲 then summoned the witness forward and announced that from that day onward, Keisuke 𝗏𝗏𝗏 was officially a member of Valhalla. The other members cheered, raising their fists in celebration. Todoroki noticed 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻's disbelief as he clenched his fists and shouted for everyone to wait. He turned to 𝗏𝗏𝗏, questioning how he could betray 𝗏𝗏𝗏 after helping to establish it alongside Mikey and the others. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 smirked and insisted that he wouldn't betray 𝗏𝗏𝗏 because he was a founding member, dismissing 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻's concerns. As 𝗏𝗏𝗏 recounted the story of 𝗏𝗏𝗏's formation and the incident that led to his and 𝗧𝗪𝗃's arrest, Todoroki listened intently. He learned that the incident involving Mikey's older brother had been an accident, though 𝗧𝗪𝗃 viewed it differently. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 expressed gratitude for 𝗧𝗪𝗃's support, which had kept him out of juvenile detention. 𝗵𝗲 acknowledged 𝗏𝗏𝗏's story and welcomed him aboard Valhalla, tossing him a white jacket that represented their uniform. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 caught it and put it on, then turned to 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻 with a message for Mikey about an upcoming battle between Valhalla and 𝗏𝗏𝗏. 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻 was taken aback by the sudden turn of events, especially when 𝗏𝗏𝗏 pointed out Todoroki as his ally. Confused, 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻 wondered about Todoroki's connection to 𝗧𝗪𝗃 and why he seemed familiar. As he pondered, a memory of Todoroki in a 𝗏𝗏𝗏 uniform flashed in his mind, leaving him with unanswered questions. A Valhalla member interrupted his thoughts, urging him to leave. 𝗧𝗪𝗄𝐻 apologized and glanced at Chifuyu, wanting to assist him, but was stopped by other Valhalla members. Afterward, Todoroki and 𝗏𝗏𝗏 departed, with Todoroki following 𝗏𝗏𝗏, who seemed to be heading toward Chifuyu's house to apologize for earlier actions. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 thanked Todoroki for his support as they approached an apartment complex. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 knocked on the door, and a woman in an apron answered, engaging in conversation with him before inviting them inside. As they entered, Todoroki observed the apartment and followed 𝗏𝗏𝗏 into the living room. 𝗏𝗏𝗏's apology to Chifuyu's mother for hurting her son surprised Todoroki, who watched as she reassured 𝗏𝗏𝗏 that it was unnecessary. She then offered them a meal, instructing Chifuyu to tend to their guests. Watching the warm interaction made Todoroki reflect on his own family, wishing things had been different for him. Chifuyu approached, expressing gratitude for the offer, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏 suggested they leave. Todoroki followed him out, noticing Chifuyu wanting to stop them but unable to. As they stepped outside, Todoroki observed 𝗏𝗏𝗏 walking aimlessly under the darkening sky. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 mentioned they would meet again in battle before parting ways. Todoroki continued on his path back to the shared apartment, keeping the Valhalla jacket on, knowing the others were unaware of its significance. Upon entering, he was greeted by Midoriya, who smiled and welcomed him back. Kirishima observed that Todoroki had been returning home late since their encounter with 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and inquired if there was something they should know. 𝗧𝗏, not wanting to pressure him, asked about it too. Todoroki simply replied that he was fine and had just been exploring before heading to his room. He closed the door and lay on his bed, clearly fatigued from all the walking. Meanwhile, the others exchanged glances. Denki pointed out the jacket Todoroki was wearing, noting how great it looked. 𝗧𝗏 agreed, while Bakugo leaned back on the sofa and questioned why anyone would buy clothes they wouldn't take back with them. Denki countered that one could never know what might happen. 𝗧𝗏 suggested they all go to sleep and check on 𝗧𝗵𝐻 the next day. Kirishima stood up, agreeing, and Midoriya wished everyone good night before heading to his shared room with Todoroki. On October 26, 2017, Naruto asked 𝗧𝗵𝐻 how things were going on his end. 𝗧𝗵𝐻 muttered that he was fine. Just lost in thought. Naruto reassured him that he would be able to save Bnha with the group's help, emphasizing the need for all the assistance they could get. 𝗧𝗵𝐻 expressed frustration, wishing he could take Naruto with him, but Naruto explained that his presence would disrupt the timeline. He stood up and extended his hand, and 𝗧𝗵𝐻 accepted the handshake, feeling determined. Meanwhile, Todoroki was in the city, following Kazutora without knowing their destination. Kazutora suddenly announced their arrival and pulled Todoroki inside a building before he could read the sign. Once inside, Todoroki observed the various tattoos displayed around the room. A man sitting on a stool greeted Kazutora, who introduced Todoroki as a friend interested in getting a tattoo. The man suggested Todoroki look around to choose one, and Kazutora assured him he would cover the cost. As Todoroki wandered, he paused at several tattoos that caught his eye. Kazutora stood beside him, encouraging him to make a good choice. The man approached with a tattoo design and asked if Todoroki was sure about such a large piece for his first tattoo. Todoroki nodded, and the man instructed him to sit in a chair while he prepared his tools. Kazutora shared that he had gotten his own tattoo as a child, revealing a tiger design partially hidden by his shirt. He suggested they visit a piercing shop afterward to get matching piercings, which made Todoroki smile. After a few days, 𝗧𝗵𝐻 had provided Naruto with evidence to prove the truth about their group before returning to the future, all while contemplating how to prevent a looming incident. Having learned about Kazutora and Bnha's backstory, Todoroki had been spending time with Kazutora since being introduced to Valhalla. The tattoo artist warned Todoroki that it might hurt a bit, and after a few minutes, Kazutora complimented Todoroki's new tattoo as he admired it in the mirror. Satisfied with his first tattoo on his back, Todoroki thanked the artist as they exited the building. As they walked, Todoroki gazed up at the sky, wondering what the others were doing. Kazutora smiled and remarked that Todoroki seemed like a cool person. Todoroki returned the smile, and Kazutora eagerly suggested they go for matching piercings. He grabbed Todoroki's hand and began to run, pulling him along. Upon arriving at their destination, Kazutora and Todoroki narrowly avoided a truck after Kazutora crossed the street without noticing the red light. Catching their breath, they entered the shop, where a bell chimed to signal their arrival. The shopkeeper greeted them, and Kazutora announced their intention to get their ears pierced. After spending the day with Kazutora, Todoroki stopped by the park where he had first met Bnha. He shared his experiences with Kazutora, and Bnha was surprised to learn he had gotten a tattoo. Todoroki nodded and showed Bnha his back. Bnha complimented him on his piercing as well. After their brief exchange, Bnha stood up from the swing and smiled before leaving. Todoroki followed suit, making his way back to the apartment, where the others were busy playing a video game. They welcomed him back with cheerful greetings. Midoriya greeted him with a smile, and he nodded before heading straight to his room. He flopped down on his bed, gritting his teeth as he remembered the tattoo on his back. The pain lingered, but he could manage it. As long as it wasn't touched or grazed, he would be fine. He planned to take a hot shower the next day to help ease the discomfort. The day before the fight, Bnha had called him to meet at a location he had sent via text. Upon arriving, he saw Bnha leaning against the railings of a bridge. Bnha had instructed him to keep his distance and to conceal his face, so he wore a black mask with his hood up. As he looked in Bnha's direction, he noticed Chifuyu and 𝗧𝗵𝐻 approaching. The three of them seemed to be engaged in conversation before Chifuyu walked toward him, standing on the other side of the staircase. 𝗧𝗧𝗵𝐻 appeared to be trying to convince Bnha to return to Toulon. Bnha left as Chifuyu moved closer to 𝗧𝗧𝗵𝐻. 𝗧𝗵𝐻, noticing a Valhalla member leaning against the railings, feared it was a spy sent by Kisaki to keep tabs on Bnha. He felt a wave of relief when he recognized the red hair and piercing blue eyes beneath the hoodie and mask as the figure turned to look at Bnha. He silently thanked the sun for being cooperative. 𝗧𝗵𝐴 thought that 𝗵𝗲 must have brought this person along. Chifuyu, noticing 𝗧𝗵𝐴's gaze, followed it and frowned when he saw 𝗵𝗲 smiling as they descended the stairs together. Chifuyu then spoke, indicating they should move. 𝗧𝗵𝐴 snapped out of his thoughts and followed Chifuyu down the staircase. That night, the group attended a 𝗏𝗏𝗏 meeting. They arrived at the shrine, where other gang members were already gathered. The group separated into their divisions before 𝗓𝗏𝗏 announced the start of the meeting. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 began his speech, and 𝗧𝗏𝗏 felt 𝗧𝗵𝐴's eyes on him. He pretended not to notice to avoid raising suspicion. The group was surprised when 𝗏𝗏𝗏 shifted from playful to serious in an instant, prompting cheers from the other gang members. Bakugo muttered that it looked like things were getting underway. Midoriya's expression turned serious as he thought about the battle ahead, realizing it was the final confrontation that would determine everything. Kirishima shared the sentiment, glancing at the front and thinking about how he was counting on everyone. Todoroki, aware of 𝗵𝗲's plan but hesitant to share it, chose to keep it to himself, glancing at Chifuyu beside 𝗧𝗵𝐴. As they left, Midoriya and Todoroki lingered to check on 𝗧𝗵𝐴, with Midoriya taking the lead since Todoroki wanted to avoid any questions. They walked down the stairs with the Baku squad ahead of them, as Bakugo was eager to get home for some rest. Just as they reached the last steps, someone called out to them. They turned to see 𝗏𝗏𝗏, 𝗓𝗏𝗏, and Mitsuya. Midoriya smiled and asked if 𝗏𝗏𝗏 needed something. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 invited him to join him on his bike, and Midoriya informed Todoroki that he would see him back at the apartment before running off to join 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and the others. Todoroki nodded and continued walking, following the Baku squad, who were likely already at the store. Meanwhile, Midoriya found himself in Umeshita Park with 𝗏𝗏𝗏, 𝗓𝗏𝗏, and the other captains and vice-captains. He asked 𝗏𝗏𝗏 what they were doing there, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏 leaned against the railings, indicating he wanted to ask him something. Midoriya nodded and leaned back against the railings, trying to remain calm despite his nerves as he noticed the others leaving them alone. The day of the battle arrived, and the group prepared themselves. Todoroki had other plans, informing them that he needed to take care of something quickly before leaving the apartment. Denki remarked that it was strange, but Bakugo urged them to move on. Todoroki headed straight to Valhalla's hideout, where he found 𝗵𝗲 and Kazutora. Kazutora greeted him with a smile and an arm around his shoulder. After waiting for a few minutes for the other gang members, they made their way to the abandoned parking lot. Todoroki glanced at 𝗵𝗲 and Kazutora as the referee called for their entrance. As they entered the parking lot, Todoroki spotted 𝗏𝗏𝗏 on the other side with his friends, while onlookers surrounded them, eager for the battle to begin. Kazutora and 𝗓𝗏𝗏 stood in front of the referee, facing each other, while Todoroki's friends seemed preoccupied. Bakugo impatiently wondered where Todoroki was, and Kirishima speculated that he might show up at the last moment. Bakugo expressed his frustration, and 𝗍𝗏 tried to calm him down. Denki hoped Todoroki would make it in time. As the referee was punched by Valhalla's representative, Kazutora declared that they had come to win. Hanma asked 𝗏𝗏𝗏 if they were ready to begin, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏 announced the start of the battle. Both gangs charged at each other. Todoroki quickly engaged two 𝗏𝗏𝗏 members, ensuring he stayed out of sight from his friends. Bakugo took on multiple Valhalla members at once, surprising everyone, while Kirishima found himself surrounded and muttered about the unfairness of the situation as he kicked an opponent. Bakugo taunted the Valhalla members, challenging their strength. Valhalla members began rushing toward him. Bakugo smirked beneath his mask, ready for the challenge. 𝗍𝗏 and Denki stood back to back, doing their best to fend off the incoming attackers. Denki expressed concern about their numbers, feeling overwhelmed as he kicked one of the opponents. 𝗍𝗏 urged him to keep them occupied. Midoriya, surrounded by Valhalla members, continued to fight fiercely, narrowly avoiding blows. One of the attackers remarked on Midoriya's tenacity, noting the BLD on his hoodie, hands, and shoes. Midoriya thought about helping 𝗧𝗵𝗏𝗏, glancing around for him. Todoroki, who was managing to assist a few 𝗏𝗏𝗏 members discreetly, noticed that 𝗵𝗲𝗏 was missing, likely waiting for an opportunity to strike at Kisaki, who was also absent from the chaos. Todoroki observed Kazutora and 𝗏𝗏𝗏, hearing Kazutora shout angrily as he charged at 𝗏𝗏𝗏, only to have 𝗓𝗏𝗏 block his punch. Todoroki moved closer, landing a few hits on Valhalla members while watching Hanma confront 𝗏𝗂𝗏. He noticed 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝐺 being dragged by one of the Valhalla members but saw Mitsuya already intervening. Taking advantage of the distraction, Todoroki decided to search for 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏. Meanwhile, Midoriya, covered in dirt, kicked two Valhalla members away before landing a punch on another. Bakugo threw one of the Valhalla members toward a group surrounding Denki, reminding him to stay alert. Denki thanked him while delivering a punch of his own, expressing frustration at the relentless attackers. Zero stood beside Bakugo, echoing Denki's sentiment about their overwhelming odds. Bakugo insisted they just needed to keep fighting, and Kirishima joined him, ready to take on more opponents. As the Tomon members faced the Valhalla group, Bakugo shouted encouragement, motivating them to push back against their adversaries. The tide began to turn as they fought back fiercely, with Midoriya smiling beneath his mask after taking down another opponent. The group heard 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏𝐴's voice as he struggled, and Mitsuya quickly came to his aid, helping the Tomon members regain their footing. Bakugo clenched his fist, feeling the energy of the fight. Denki pointed out Mikey chasing after Kazutora, expressing concern about the situation. Bakugo urged them to focus on the fight at hand, and Kirishima joined him in the fray. Midoriya noticed two Valhalla members approaching him but quickly dispatched them, realizing Mikey was in a tough spot. Bakugo shouted at Midoriya to stay focused, and Midoriya quickly jumped onto a Valhalla member, ready to assist. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 called out to Mikey, prompting everyone to turn their attention to him as he found himself surrounded. Denki cursed under his breath, but Bakugo remained confident, knowing Mikey would not back down. Mikey slowly rose to his feet, and Bakugo struck another Valhalla member, rallying his friends to continue fighting. Midoriya, feeling fatigued, held onto a Valhalla member's hair before throwing him into a group of their allies. He checked on his teammates, ensuring they were all right before they all separated to continue the battle. Bakugo dismissed Kazutora's taunts, focusing on the fight. The group watched as Kazutora wielded a metal pipe, contemplating their next move. Denki expressed doubt about intervening, but Bakugo insisted it wasn't their fight. Just then, Mikey kicked Kazutora, showcasing his strength. Denki admired Mikey's prowess as Kazutora fell to the ground. The group prepared to defend Mikey from the remaining Valhalla members, determined to protect him at all costs. Midoriya kicked and punched his way through the crowd, clearing a path for 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, who was trying to reach Mikey. As they fought, Denki called for everyone to help 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, and they quickly agreed, splitting up to create a path. Midoriya encouraged 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 to hurry, while Bakugo continued to fend off attackers. The fight was intense, but the Tomon members were determined to prevail, using their skills and teamwork to push back against the Valhalla horde. Denki observed as someone was about to strike Mikey, and the group was taken aback when a figure intervened, landing a punch on the assailant's face, stopping him from harming Mikey. As the identity of the rescuer was revealed, the group was less than impressed. Bakugo remarked on the audacity of the individual orchestrating the chaos while he elbowed a Valhalla member in the face. Midoriya leaped onto a car, urging the group to move forward. The surprise deepened when other Tomon members began to cheer for him, particularly 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. Denki pointed out a figure in a Valhalla jacket approaching Kisaki, brandishing a metal pipe. Kirishima questioned if that was who he thought it was. The figure appeared behind Kisaki and struck him on the head with the metal pipe after calling out his name. 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 recognized him and exclaimed in relief. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 declared his intent to deliver a serious blow to Kisaki, vowing to ruin his face. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 shouted for 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 to stop, reminding him they were there to rescue him. Mitsuya added his voice to the call, and the group watched in awe as 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 took Kisaki down with a single blow. However, Kisaki's right-hand man retaliated, throwing 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 down the pile of cars as Kisaki regained his footing. Bakugo turned to 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, who was now approached by Chifuyu, expressing his frustration at their situation. The group watched as Chifuyu attempted to reason with 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, only to receive a punch in return. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 asserted that he had only kept Chifuyu close for his usefulness in battle. Denki muttered his disapproval of 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏's words. Chifuyu, determined, stood up and claimed his role as the first squad vice-captain, stating he was there to protect 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. He warned 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 that if he insisted on fighting, he wouldn't hold back either. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 challenged him, and Chifuyu stood firm, counting down from 10. Zero nudged Denki as Bakugo moved closer to the two, and the group followed, unaware that Midoriya had fallen behind. After 𝗏𝗏 finished counting, he continued his ascent, only to be halted by Takemichi, who rushed forward and restrained him. The group paused, watching as Takemichi scanned the area for Kazutora, who had suddenly vanished. Denki's words trailed off when Kazutora appeared behind 𝗏𝗏, holding a knife. Another Valhalla member intervened, pushing Kazutora away from 𝗏𝗏, causing them both to tumble to the ground. Kirishima inquired about the identity of the unknown Valhalla member, and when the hood fell away, the group gasped in recognition. Takemichi murmured Todoroki's name, noting that his face was obscured by a black mask, making it difficult for others to identify him. Takemichi turned to 𝗏𝗏, concerned for his well-being. 𝗏𝗏 merely stated that it was just a scratch. Todoroki, meanwhile, focused on Kazutora, urging him to snap out of it and recognize that he was being manipulated. He reassured Kazutora that he bore no blame for the situation, emphasizing that it wasn't too late for him to change. As the group watched, 𝗏𝗏 approached Kisaki with the intent to finish him off. Denki suddenly realized Midoriya was missing, prompting concern among the group. Kazutora was taken aback when Todoroki embraced him, and he instinctively returned the hug, tears welling in his eyes. Meanwhile, 𝗏𝗏 coughed and collapsed, unable to complete his task against Kisaki. Chifuyu rushed to his side, calling out his name. Bakugo sarcastically commented on the chaos unfolding before them. Todoroki noticed Mikey approaching Draken and Hanma, swiftly taking down Hanma and causing the Valhalla members to scatter. Mikey then walked toward them, and Kazutora released his embrace, standing to face Mikey. He whispered something to Todoroki that was barely audible. The two shared an emotionless gaze, and the group was shocked when Mikey struck Kazutora, declaring that if he could only destroy what was precious to him, he would have to destroy Kazutora as well. Mikey followed up with a kick to Kazutora's head. Bakugo stepped in front of Denki, who attempted to intervene, but he halted when he saw Bakugo's expression. Kirishima looked at Todoroki, who remained on the ground, lost in thought. They turned their attention back to 𝗏𝗏, who had managed to stand. 𝗏𝗏 called out to Mikey, halting his assault on Kazutora. Mikey approached 𝗏𝗏 slowly, and 𝗏𝗏 expressed gratitude for Mikey's concern for him. Instead of confronting Mikey, 𝗏𝗏 moved toward Kazutora, assuring him that his wound was not fatal. Denki muttered his disbelief as 𝗏𝗏 unexpectedly drew a knife from his jacket. The group gasped when 𝗏𝗏 raised the knife, but before he could act, a figure landed nearby, grabbing the knife from 𝗏𝗏's hands. It was Midoriya, who smiled at his friends, the knife stained. Chifuyu rushed to 𝗏𝗏's side as he collapsed. The group surrounded Midoriya, checking for injuries and expressing their concern for his reckless actions. Denki questioned his sanity as Takemichi hurried to assist Chifuyu and 𝗏𝗏. Todoroki snapped out of his daze and approached Midoriya, while Takemichi stood between Kazutora and Mikey, trying to reason with Mikey. However, he was met with a punch instead. Midoriya rushed toward Takemichi, calling out to him, while Kirishima urged him to stop. Midoriya reassured Takemichi that he was not dead, but he suddenly collapsed, alarming everyone around him. Takemichi approached as Mikey picked up the charm that had fallen from his jacket. Police sirens echoed in the distance, prompting the onlookers to disperse along with Toumon. Kazutora moved closer to Mikey as the group gathered around Midoriya and 𝗏𝗏. Toumon members began to leave, leaving only the captains and vice-captains, Draken, Mikey, and Kazutora, who turned to the others and suggested they should go. Bakugo stood up, reluctant to leave, but insisted they should move on to avoid any serious consequences. The others watched as they left Midoriya and 𝗏𝗏 in Kazutora's care. Todoroki glanced at Kazutora, who smiled back before they departed. Bakugo wandered the streets at night, unsure of where to go. It had been 3 days since the chaotic Halloween event, and Midoriya and 𝗏𝗏 remained unconscious in the hospital. The others waited anxiously at the apartment for news of their recovery. Before heading out, Kirishima and the others wanted to accompany him, but he firmly declined, warning them to stay away. As Bakugo was about to turn left, he heard a commotion from a nearby alley. Out of boredom and curiosity, He peeked around the corner and saw a group of adult men surrounding someone on the ground, who appeared to be injured and bruised. The individual was likely around his age, based on his build. Though Bakugu couldn't see his face, he recognized him by his distinctive bleached hair and tattoos on the back of his hands. Bakugu thought to himself that this person had been present during the Moebius and Valhalla fight. Feeling annoyed at the sight of the man not defending himself, Bakugu watched as the adults kicked him while laughing. He considered walking away but felt compelled to intervene. Running toward the group, he shouted at them, demanding to know what they thought they were doing. One of the men glared at him, questioning his audacity. Bakugu retorted, pointing out that they shouldn't pick on someone weaker than themselves. As one of the men attempted to attack him from behind, Bakugu swiftly elbowed him in the face. He smirked as two others charged at him, but before they could reach him, he delivered a powerful kick to one, sending him crashing into the other. 𝗵𝗲 observed from a distance as Bakugu took down the group effortlessly. Initially planning to leave after helping the injured man, Bakugu changed his mind upon seeing 𝗵𝗲's condition. 𝗵𝗲 stood up and looked at Bakugu, who wore a bored expression after defeating the attackers. Before 𝗵𝗲 could express his gratitude, Bakugu approached him and placed an arm around his shoulder. Unable to take 𝗵𝗲 back to the apartment, he led him to a nearby convenience store. He made 𝗵𝗲 sit at one of the outdoor tables while he went inside to gather supplies to treat 𝗵𝗲's wounds, also grabbing 2 cups of noodles and bottles of water before heading to the cashier. 𝗵𝗲 watched as Bakugu returned with a plastic bag and placed it on the table in front of him. Bakugu instructed him to wait a moment while he opened the cups of noodles and went back inside to fill them with hot water. When he returned, he handed one of the cups to 𝗵𝗲 and offered him a pair of chopsticks. As they began to eat, 𝗵𝗲 observed Bakugu, who ignored his gaze and pulled out the supplies needed for first aid. Bakugu asked why the group had attacked him, hoping to ease the tension. 𝗵𝗲 explained that he had been on his way home and ignored the men when they called out to him, which seemed to have provoked them. Bakugu commented on how adults often acted more immature than teenagers these days while he prepared to wrap 𝗵𝗲's wounds. 𝗵𝗲 smiled and asked for Bakugu's name. Bakugu replied that they were likely the same age and introduced himself. 𝗵𝗲 introduced himself as Shuji 𝗵𝗲 and thanked Bakugu for saving him. Bakugu shrugged off the gratitude, stating that he couldn't just stand by and let those wannabe gangsters harm someone. He then inquired about why 𝗵𝗲 was out alone at night. 𝗵𝗲 mentioned he was just out for a walk after visiting a friend in the hospital. Bakugu nodded, lying about the reason for his visit, as he didn't want 𝗵𝗲 to know he had been there during the incident. After finishing the first aid, Bakugu suggested accompanying 𝗵𝗲 home, as he had nothing else to do. 𝗵𝗲 agreed, lifting his cup of noodles in appreciation. They cleaned up their table, and just as they were about to leave, a car pulled up in front of them. The driver's side window rolled down, revealing a male with red and white hair, who looked at the two of them with surprise. Bakugu glanced at 𝗵𝗲, noting the time. It was almost midnight, and he could sense the concern from their friends. 𝗵𝗲, unfazed by Bakugu's nickname, acknowledged him. 𝗵𝗲 felt a flicker of recognition but couldn't place where he had seen Bakugu before. Shoto introduced himself, and 𝗵𝗲 returned the gesture with a smile. Bakugu suggested they give 𝗵𝗲 a ride home, and after disposing of their trash, they all got into the car. As 𝗵𝗲 settled into the passenger seat, Bakugu took the back. He turned to Todoroki and inquired about the car. Todoroki explained that he had acquired it a few days prior, anticipating their future needs. Bakugu questioned why he hadn't opted for a bike instead. Todoroki reasoned that he wanted everyone to have a say in the decision. Bakugu clicked his tongue in annoyance, leaning back in his seat. Todoroki then asked 𝗵𝗲 for directions to his home. 𝗵𝗲 pointed the way, and Bakugu texted their friends about getting bikes later. Upon arriving at 𝗵𝗲's house, he thanked them for the ride just as a woman's voice called out from behind him, asking where he had been. Bakugu and Todoroki couldn't see her due to 𝗵𝗲's position. Bakugu urged Todoroki to drive away, and they left. As they drove, Todoroki noticed 𝗵𝗲's numerous bandages and asked about them. Bakugu explained that he had found 𝗵𝗲 being confronted by a group of adults. Todoroki expressed surprise at Bakugu's willingness to help someone. Bakugu challenged Todoroki's comment, and the conversation shifted to their plans for Kazutora. Todoroki informed 𝗵𝗃𝗄 that they intended to visit him the next day and mentioned Midoriya's suggestion to bail him out. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 raised concerns about where Kazutora would stay if they did bail him. Todoroki suggested that it might be best for Kazutora to stay with them, but 𝗵𝗃𝗄 was wary of the risks involved. He pressed Todoroki on whether they had even asked Kazutora or Takemichi about their feelings on the situation. Todoroki remained silent, acknowledging the truth in 𝗵𝗃𝗄's words. Once they reached their apartment, the two headed straight to their rooms. 𝗧𝗏 greeted them, expressing relief at their return, while Kirishima showed concern for 𝗵𝗃𝗄. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 informed them he would be in his room if needed, and Todoroki followed suit. After they disappeared, 𝗧𝗏 and Kirishima exchanged glances, curious about what had transpired. The next day, the group arrived at the detention center where Kazutora was held, greeted by the same guard who escorted them to the visitors' hall. The guard confirmed they were there to submit Kazutora's bail. He led them to an office where the person in charge was located. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 chose to wait outside with Todoroki while the others went inside. Todoroki asked 𝗵𝗃𝗄 why he wanted to stay behind, and 𝗵𝗃𝗄 expressed his longing to visit 𝗵. They walked towards the entrance, and another guard escorted them to the visiting hall. They sat at a table while waiting for 𝗵 to arrive. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 explained that he intended to deliver a message from Дракон and the others. Todoroki inquired if this was related to the time Midoriya had gone somewhere with Mikey, and 𝗵𝗃𝗄 confirmed it. As 𝗵 arrived, he was puzzled about who they were. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 clarified that they were there to relay a message from Дракон. Meanwhile, Kirishima and the others speculated about the bail situation. Kirishima mentioned that 𝗵𝗃𝗄 had instructed him to try and bail 𝗵 out. Denki wondered where 𝗵𝗃𝗄 and Todoroki had gone, and Kirishima suggested they might be visiting 𝗵. After informing 𝗵 about the possibility of his bail, 𝗵𝗃𝗄 and Todoroki made their way out, spotting Kirishima and the others in the hallway. Kirishima called out to 𝗵𝗃𝗄, and 𝗧𝗏 asked how things had gone. Todoroki replied that it had gone well, and 𝗵𝗃𝗄 urged them to leave before anyone noticed them. They all got into the car that Todoroki had purchased a few days earlier. Denki asked where they were headed, and 𝗵𝗃𝗄 replied that they were going to a bike shop. Kirishima expressed excitement about getting their bikes, while 𝗧𝗏 wondered what he would choose. As 𝗵𝗃𝗄 drove off, Denki questioned whether they even knew how to drive, prompting 𝗵𝗃𝗄 to remind him about driving lessons. The group decided to head to Tokyo for their bike shopping adventure, excited for the day ahead. Denki looked up at the sign of the shop, and Todoroki nodded before following 𝗵𝗃𝗄, who was already making his way inside. The others followed, and upon entering, they noticed someone in a 𝗃𝗏 uniform. They were certain there were no females in 𝗃𝗏, aside from Emma, Mikey's sister, and Hina, Takemichi's girlfriend. The individual might just have long hair. They pretended not to recognize 𝗃𝗏 and casually walked toward the front desk, where Todoroki inquired about their best options. The employee at the front desk gestured for them to follow, leading them to the other side of the shop. Denki whispered to 𝗧𝗏, asking who the long-haired person was. 𝗧𝗏 recalled that he was their vice captain and informed Denki of this. Denki then asked why he was there, but 𝗵𝗃𝗄 interrupted, telling him it was none of his business. Denki quickly apologized, looking down. The employee informed them about the latest Suzuki C50 Boulevard and other new releases, including Yamaha models. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 examined the C50 before shifting his attention to another bike. The employee noticed and explained that it was a Suzuki SV650, though parts for it were hard to find these days. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 smirked and decided to take it, requesting it in black. The employee nodded and instructed another staff member to prepare the paperwork. Denki's attention was caught by a bike with a black and yellow color scheme, and he asked about it. The employee identified it as the Bolt, one of Yamaha's star cruisers. 𝗧𝗏, knowing Denki's interest, anticipated that he would choose it, and Denki confirmed his decision. 𝗧𝗏 raised his hand, announcing he would take the Boulevard in black, while Kirishima pointed to a red bike, stating he wanted it in red. The employee nodded and turned to Todoroki, who indicated he would take the silver bike as it was. The employee complimented their choices and went to prepare the necessary papers. The group waited by the entrance, ignoring the long-haired male in the 𝗃𝗏 uniform. Denki whispered to 𝗧𝗏, asking for the long-haired male's name. 𝗧𝗪𝗼 believed it was Sanzu. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 warned them to be quiet, and they nodded in response. The employee returned, asking them to sign some documents. Denki inquired about customization options, and the employee confirmed they could customize their bikes and offered a discount for purchasing multiple bikes. Denki celebrated with a fist pump. Todoroki announced he would wait outside and headed toward the long-haired male as he exited the shop. Kirishima asked how long it would take to receive their bikes. The employee explained that it depended on how quickly the paperwork was processed, estimating about 2 weeks to a month at most. He reassured them that it wouldn't take a year unless something unexpected occurred. Outside, Todoroki leaned against a car, gazing up at the sky, hoping for a swift recovery for someone important to him as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. On November 18, 2017, a male stood in front of a gravestone, smiling as he placed flowers at its base. He greeted the gravestone beside it, introducing a friend who stood beside him. Meanwhile, Takemichi was in Kazutora's car after being saved from a dangerous situation. Kazutora informed him that someone wanted to meet him, but Takemichi was confused when he realized they were headed to the cemetery. Kazutora parked the car and instructed him to get out. Takemichi followed, still puzzled, and noticed a man standing in front of a grave. The man had short black hair and gray eyes, dressed in a black hoodie and joggers. When the man turned, Takemichi was startled to see a prominent scar on his face, with one eye a striking blue. Takemichi exclaimed Todoroki's name in surprise. Behind Todoroki appeared another male, catching Takemichi off guard. He recognized 𝗵𝗲, who looked the same but was now wearing gold-rimmed glasses and his usual striped suit. 𝗵𝗲 greeted Takemichi and placed a hand on Todoroki's shoulder, saying he would wait in the car. After 𝗵𝗲 left, only the three of them remained. Takemichi glanced at the gravestone in front of Todoroki, wondering who he was visiting. His eyes widened in shock when he read the name, Midoriya family grave. Turning to Todoroki and Kazutora, he saw the gravestone next to it read, 𝗏𝗏 family grave. Takemichi was taken aback, and Todoroki revealed that Midoriya had died trying to protect 𝗏𝗏. Kazutora added that 𝗏𝗏 had died trying to save Mitsuya. Takemichi, overwhelmed with questions, looked at Todoroki, who was still focused on Midoriya's gravestone. He wanted to ask what had happened and why 𝗵𝗲 was with them, but Todoroki explained that 𝗵𝗲 was on their side, having met him one night along with 𝗏𝗃𝗲. He paused, gazing at 𝗏𝗏's gravestone. 𝗏𝗏 had been stabbed while trying to save Mitsuya from a dire fate at the hands of Taiju. Takemichi repeated the name Taiju, struggling to recall anyone by that name. Todoroki informed him that Taiju was the 10th generation leader of the Black Dragons, describing him as a ruthless individual who would not hesitate to harm others, even a girl. Takemichi noticed the shift in Todoroki's tone when he spoke about Taiju. Curious, he asked how the incident had unfolded, wanting to discuss it with Naoto later. Todoroki explained that Hakai had wanted to confront Taiju, but he couldn't go through with it, which nearly led to Taiju harming him and their sister. They had arrived too late, witnessing 𝗏𝗏 getting stabbed. Takemichi expressed his surprise, realizing Hakai had a sister and questioned her motives. Todoroki revealed that Kisaki had manipulated her into believing that killing 𝗏𝗏 was the only way to save Hakai. Takemichi, concerned, asked what had happened afterward. Todoroki replied that they had left Tamon, no longer wanting to be associated with the gang. As Todoroki looked at the gravestones, he told Takemichi not to share this information with the others before turning away and leaving. Takemichi took one last look at the gravestones, furrowing his brow as he made a new resolution in his mind. He vowed to save Midoriya and 𝗏𝗏, determined not to let them die. With that thought, he walked back to the cemetery entrance, where Kazutora was waiting. Once inside the car, Takemichi decided to ask Kazutora everything he knew. He wondered how Kazutora was connected to them, speculating that perhaps Chifuyu or 𝗏𝗏 had introduced them. Kazutora began to respond, but Denki interrupted, looking at their friend still lying in the hospital bed. Denki expressed his concern, while Kirishima reassured him that Midoriya would wake up soon, noting that he was tougher than he appeared. The group was visiting Midoriya in the hospital, taking turns to stay overnight. Kirishima attempted to change the subject by asking 𝗏𝗃𝗲 and Todoroki about the bail situation. 𝗏𝗃𝗲 inquired if they wanted good or bad news, and 𝗧𝗏 hesitantly revealed that 𝗏 could not be bailed out because he had acted independently, unlike 𝗧𝗏, who had been manipulated by Kisaki. Denki then called their attention, announcing that Midoriya was waking up. Todoroki excused himself to call a doctor. Midoriya slowly opened his eyes, adjusting to the bright lights, and looked at each of them. Denki sighed in relief, welcoming him back, while Kirishima smiled and asked how long he had been asleep. 𝗧𝗏 informed him it had been about a week. Midoriya, recalling his previous injuries, asked what the difference was this time. Kirishima reminded him that the knife had pierced a critical area, while Bakugo noted the severity of the situation. Midoriya explained that he had grabbed the knife from Baj's hands, and in the process, it had pierced him. He admitted he hadn't paid much attention to it afterward, feeling exhausted from the earlier fight. 𝗧𝗏 playfully advised him to be more careful next time. The doctor arrived with Todoroki, who had been checking on Midoriya's condition. The doctor informed them that Midoriya could leave the hospital the next day, provided he took care not to get hurt again. Midoriya asked what had happened after he saved Bajie. Kirishima explained that Bajie was still in a coma but would wake up soon. Curious about Kazutora, Midoriya inquired about him. 𝗧𝗏 confirmed that they were working on getting Kazutora out and were awaiting confirmation on his bail. Midoriya then asked about 𝗏, to which Kirishima responded with a frown that he could not be bailed out. Bakugo, trying to instill hope, mentioned that Todoroki had a plan. A week later, Kazutora was called to the front, confused as he followed two guards. He saw a man leaning against the counter, who handed him a box as the guard removed his cuffs. Kazutora was puzzled and asked what was happening. The man informed him that a friend had bailed him out before leaving Kazutora with more questions. After changing, he was allowed to leave the facility. As he stepped outside, he heard a voice calling him. He turned to see an ash-blonde-haired male with striking red eyes standing next to Todoroki. Kazutora approached them, and Todoroki welcomed him back with a smile. Bakugo introduced himself with a smirk, and Kirishima, who was in the driver's seat, greeted him warmly. Kazutora noticed another male with yellow hair and a black streak in his bangs, who introduced himself as Kaminari. A raven-haired male appeared beside Kaminari, introducing himself as 𝗧𝗏. Kaminari then called for Midoriya, pulling him over to the window. Midoriya smiled and introduced himself, and Kazutora noticed the freckles on his face. Bakugo, eager to get moving, urged Kirishima to switch seats. Todoroki opened the door for Kazutora, and they all climbed into the car. As Bakugo started the engine and sped off, Kirishima explained that Kazutora might be wondering why he was out, but 𝗧𝗏 assured him they had already explained it. Denki excitedly shouted that they were going to have some fun, while Bakugo warned everyone to hold on tight as he accelerated. Midoriya, sitting beside Kazutora, expressed concern about the speed, but Bakugo dismissed him, urging him to be quiet. As the car slowed down, Bakugo realized they were heading to a restaurant, which surprised him due to its upscale appearance. Kirishima smiled and encouraged him to choose anything he wanted, mentioning that Todoroki would cover the bill. Kazutora glanced at his menu, recalling the others, and smiled to himself before Todoroki inquired about his choice. Kazutora pointed to a dish he had selected. After their meal, they returned to the apartment with Kazutora. Denki offered him a place to stay, noting that they had 2 extra rooms. Kazutora asked if the others were aware of his situation, to which Kirishima replied that they still believed he was in juvenile detention. Concerned, Kazutora inquired about Baj's condition. 𝗧𝗏 informed him that Bajie was currently in the hospital and had not yet regained consciousness. Kazutora was taken aback, and 𝗧𝗏 reassured him, placing an arm around Midoriya's shoulder, explaining how Midoriya and Takemichi had saved Bajie. Midoriya felt embarrassed and looked away, while Kazutora felt a mix of surprise and relief upon hearing the news. Bakugo informed Kazutora that he could visit Bajie the following day. Denki then mentioned that Tomon's next meeting was in 15 minutes and asked if Kazutora would attend. 𝗧𝗏 chimed in, suggesting it would be a surprise for the others to see him out of juvenile detention. Kazutora, however, shook his head, expressing his need for time to gather his thoughts. The group nodded in understanding, and Midoriya offered his support, assuring Kazutora that they were there for him if he needed someone to talk to. The next day, they headed back to the hospital where Midoriya had been discharged, which was also where 𝗏𝗲 was being treated. Upon entering 𝗏𝗲's room, Kazutora saw him peacefully sleeping, and he clenched his fists, feeling a wave of emotions. Outside the room, the group waited for Kazutora to come out. Denki wondered what they would do if the others found out Kazutora was no longer in juvenile detention. 𝗧𝗏 remarked that it meant he could no longer hide, while Kirishima speculated about the upcoming meeting. Midoriya suggested that Kisaki might be expelled from Toumon, indicating that Takemichi had succeeded in his mission. However, he also noted that this would lead to new challenges for them. Bakugo mentioned that someone would need to take 𝗏𝗲's place until he woke up, and 𝗧𝗏 speculated about who that might be. The group decided to stay at the apartment to plan their next move, discussing whether they should secretly include Kazutora in their plans. They concluded that they would wait until the meeting to see how things unfolded. That night, Bakugo and Kirishima went grocery shopping, opting to go late to avoid the next day's hassle. As Bakugo moved through the store, he noticed a familiar figure under a lamppost, smoking. He approached and took the cigarette from the figure's mouth, surprising them. Bakugo urged the figure to stop smoking and handed them a lollipop before leaving to join Kirishima. Later, as they sat together, 𝗧𝗏 expressed his hope that 𝗏𝗲 would wake up soon. Kirishima agreed, putting an arm around him as they watched 𝗏𝗲 sleep. Kazutora, smiling sadly, reassured them that 𝗏𝗲 would be fine. Suddenly, they noticed 𝗏𝗲's finger move, signaling that he was waking up. Bakugo leaned against the wall, acknowledging Kazutora's wish. As Kazutora left the room, Midoriya attempted to call him back, while Kirishima pulled out his phone to contact the others. Kazutora crossed paths with someone who recognized him, but they hesitated when they saw Todoroki exiting the room. Chifuyu greeted Todoroki with a smile, and upon hearing that 𝗏𝗲 was awake, he rushed inside. Todoroki joined the others outside the room, where Midoriya welcomed Chifuyu and offered him a seat. Chifuyu sat down, looking at 𝗏𝗲, who then spoke his name. Chifuyu fought back tears of joy at seeing 𝗏𝗲 awake. Bakugo encouraged the group to leave the room, while Kirishima finished contacting the others to share the good news. As they exited, Denki wondered why Kazutora had left. Kirishima remarked as they exited the hospital, spotting their friends at the entrance. 𝗧𝗏 commented on their quick return, while Bakugo informed them that Chifuyu was already inside. Mikey expressed his gratitude before the group headed inside. Bakugo urged everyone to move, emphasizing the need to find two missing members. Todoroki had discovered Kazutora at a nearby park, where he sat on the swings, gazing up at the sky. Todoroki approached him, hoping to lift his spirits, and Kazutora nodded in response. Standing in front of Kazutora, Todoroki offered his hand, which Kazutora accepted with a smile. Together, they began walking toward the city. Denki called out to them, prompting the two to turn around and see the group approaching. Bakugo greeted them with a wave, and 𝗧𝗏 asked if they were hanging out. Kazutora and Todoroki exchanged glances before nodding in agreement. Denki smiled at them, encouraging them to join the group, and Kazutora returned the smile. Todoroki, observing their interaction, stood beside Midoriya as they continued their walk. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang remained at the hospital, talking to 𝗏𝗲 after the doctor had checked on him. 𝗏𝗲 congratulated Takemichi, who expressed his gratitude with a bow. Mitsuya suggested that 𝗏𝗲 should rest while Takemichi filled in for him. 𝗏𝗲 reflected on how his mother would likely keep him at home until he fully recovered. Дракон smiled, glad to see 𝗏𝗲 back, and asked about Kazutora. On the day of the meeting, the group convinced Kazutora to come while wearing a disguise. 𝗧𝗏 handed him a black hoodie, which he wore over Tomon's uniform, completing the look with black joggers and white sneakers. Kazutora expressed his appreciation, and Denki reassured him that it was the least they could do. Bakugo called for everyone to head out. The group arrived at the shrine, with Kazutora in the center, sticking close to Todoroki for support. Takemichi walked down the middle toward Дракон, wearing an official Toumon gang uniform. After a brief conversation, Дракон announced the start of the meeting, and Todoroki kept an eye on Kazutora to ensure he felt comfortable. Mikey appeared alongside Hanma, sparking whispers among the gang members. Chifuyu followed closely behind, prompting the group to exchange glances. 𝗵𝗃 began discussing the recent events, highlighting their victory despite overwhelming odds. 𝗏𝗃𝗂 muttered about the significance of 𝗵𝗲's presence, and 𝗵𝗃 informed them that 𝗵𝗲 had a message regarding Valhalla. The group turned their attention to 𝗧𝗏, who was equally unaware of the unfolding situation. 𝗵𝗲 introduced himself and revealed that Valhalla had never had a leader, but in light of their defeat, they were joining 𝗃𝗏. This announcement surprised the 𝗃𝗏 members, and whispers filled the air as they processed the news. 𝗏𝗃𝗂 speculated about ulterior motives, while Todoroki noted that someone must have facilitated the connection between their gangs. 𝗵𝗲 scanned the crowd, asking a certain individual to step forward. 𝗏𝗃𝗂 voiced his suspicion about Kisaki, and 𝗵𝗲 confirmed it. 𝗵𝗃 announced that there was more news to share, prompting curiosity among the group. He began discussing the aftermath of their victory, emphasizing the near loss of 𝗏𝗏 and another member. The room fell silent as they absorbed the weight of 𝗵𝗃's words. Denki commented on the difficulty of almost losing someone, while Midoriya acknowledged Takemichi's role in saving 𝗏𝗏. 𝗵𝗃 urged everyone to reflect on the situation seriously and introduced Chifuyu, who bowed before speaking. He shared his internal struggle about leaving 𝗃𝗏 but ultimately decided to stay, emphasizing the responsibility of leading the First Division. Chifuyu then nominated Takemichi as the new captain, igniting whispers among the members. Midoriya congratulated Takemichi, and Kirishima expressed his belief in Takemichi's capabilities. Denki smirked at him, while Chifuyu explained that 𝗏𝗏 had entrusted this responsibility to Takemichi. 𝗵𝗃 called for Takemichi to raise his head and respond, to which Takemichi confidently agreed to do his best. The group smiled at Takemichi's determination, sharing a light-hearted moment as the other 𝗃𝗏 captains teased him. Once the meeting concluded, the gang members began to disperse. 𝗏𝗃𝗂 announced their need to go grocery shopping, leading the way down the stairs. Kirishima, Zero, and Denki followed closely behind. Midoriya stayed with Todoroki and Kazutora, walking down the stairs while smiling at their playful banter. He mentioned that Takemichi would return home that night, prompting Kazutora to inquire about it. Midoriya, slightly embarrassed, clarified that he often mumbled. Todoroki informed them that they would meet back at the apartment, and Midoriya nodded in agreement. Kazutora looked confused by their conversation, prompting Todoroki to take his hand and guide him toward the city, urging him to follow. Kazutora looked at Midoriya, who smiled and nodded in response. He then turned to Todoroki, noticing him smiling with his eyes closed. They had decided not to go home but to enjoy the city instead, hoping to distract themselves from troubling thoughts. Upon arriving in the city, Todoroki eagerly pulled Kazutora towards the mall, leading him into a clothing store near the entrance. Kazutora expressed his hesitation, but Todoroki continued to sift through the racks, searching for clothes that would suit him. With a cheerful grin, Todoroki handed Kazutora 2 items and urged him to try them on, pushing him into a changing room. While Kazutora changed, Todoroki continued browsing through the racks, looking for more appealing outfits. Meanwhile, Denki casually strolled with his hands behind his head, commenting on how it had been weeks since they had informed Takemichi about Kazutora's release from juvie. Midoriya, not looking at them, suggested that it wasn't the right time yet, noting that Kazutora was currently in the present. Zero chimed in, placing an arm around Denki, pondering their involvement in 𝗃𝗏 and the present timeline. Denki raised a point about the potential consequences of their actions, prompting Kirishima to agree that they could be stuck in this timeline indefinitely. 𝗏𝗃𝗂, who had been silent, abruptly walked away from the group, reminding them not to lose hope of returning home. Midoriya followed, muttering about the need for a plan in case they remained in this world. He paused, realizing that their involvement in changing past events might have unforeseen consequences. Kirishima reassured him, while Zero echoed Takemichi's warning about their uncertain future. Denki, attempting to lighten the mood, joked about the possibility of being stuck forever. Kirishima suggested they focus on their return to the apartment, and Denki inquired about Kazutora's expected return. Kirishima shook his head, indicating that Kazutora might not be back until the next day. As they continued their routine over the following weeks, the group spent their time driving around Tokyo, exploring new places and training their quirks. Denki excitedly announced that he had found a bowling alley nearby, sharing its opening hours with the group. Kirishima asked what day it was, and Todoroki confirmed it was Saturday. 𝗧𝗏 suggested they invite Bakugo, who remained quiet. Midoriya then decided it was time to gather their things and head out. As Todoroki stood next to Bakugo, who was grabbing his bag, he asked if they should invite Hanma. Bakugo simply told him to do it. Todoroki nodded and called Hanma while walking beside Midoriya, who was busy with his notebook. Hanma answered the phone, and Todoroki introduced himself, inviting Hanma to join them. After receiving confirmation, Todoroki ended the call as they reached the parking lot where their bikes were parked. He handed a helmet to Midoriya, who would ride with him. Denki directed 𝗧𝗏 on their route, and Bakugo teased Denki about getting lost. Despite his nervousness, Denki assured everyone he would manage. Upon arriving at the bowling alley, they spotted a familiar figure outside, who greeted them with a smile. Denki whispered to 𝗧𝗏, questioning Hanma's presence, but Bakugo urged them to enter. Todoroki greeted Hanma warmly, who thanked him for the invitation. As they entered, Bakugo paid for their fees, commenting on their slow pace. Denki playfully challenged Bakugo, who responded with a competitive spirit. Kirishima stepped in to diffuse the tension, suggesting they focus on the game. Midoriya led Todoroki and Hanma to their designated area, with the others following suit. 𝗧𝗏 initiated the game by picking up a bowling ball, and Kirishima proposed they decide who goes first with rock, paper, scissors. The group spent the day bowling with Hanma, discovering that he was more enjoyable to be around when not focused on conflict. As they took a break, Midoriya noticed how dark it had become outside, prompting a discussion about leaving. Kaminari suggested they shouldn't get locked in, and Bakugo asked Hanma if he knew of any nearby places to go. Hanma smirked, indicating he had an idea, and the group prepared to continue their adventure. Bakugo stood up, surprising the group. Kaminari, Kirishima, and 𝗧𝗏 looked at each other, confused. Todoroki nodded and stood from his seat, prompting Midoriya to follow. The three exchanged glances before heading out of the building. Upon reaching their bikes, they noticed another bike parked beside theirs, with someone leaning against it. Todoroki approached the figure, expressing his gratitude for their assistance. The person, whose face was obscured by a hood and mask, replied casually before preparing to leave. The group recognized the voice as Kazutora. Bakugo tossed the keys to Hanma after retrieving them from Kazutora, explaining that they were for him to use. Kazutora excused himself, and the group mounted their bikes. Hanma immediately began testing the bike, and while it wasn't what they had anticipated for the night, they enjoyed themselves, disregarding the fact that they were engaging in illegal activities that could lead to trouble. Bakugo urged Todoroki to hurry as they walked toward their destination, not wanting to bring their bikes along. Todoroki apologized, following Bakugo closely. They were on their way to meet Hanma, hoping to win him over, especially after their previous encounter. Bakugo muttered his disbelief at having to follow Midoriya's orders, while Todoroki reminded him of their mission to help Takemichi, which Bakugo reluctantly acknowledged. Having been in this world for nearly a year, they were determined to assist Takemichi Hanagaki in saving his friends from a grim future. They had never imagined being trapped in a dimension without quirks, but it had taught them that heroism didn't always require special abilities. Bakugo, who initially resented this reality, found solace in the support of his classmates, especially Todoroki, who had endured his complaints and stubbornness. Bakugo swore he would take action if Midoriya was wrong about their mission. As they continued, he stopped when Todoroki raised a hand, scanning their surroundings. Bakugo questioned his friend's sudden caution, but he fell silent when laughter echoed from a nearby alley. The two exchanged glances and rushed toward the sound, discovering a group of men surrounding someone on the ground. They quickly realized the group was armed with metal pipes and other objects. Bakugo shouted at the group, launching himself into action and striking one of the attackers. Todoroki followed suit, engaging two others before positioning himself beside Bakugo. The leader of the group demanded to know who they were, instructing his friends to attack. Todoroki split from Bakugo to handle the remaining attackers while Bakugo focused on the leader, skillfully dodging incoming strikes. After a brief but intense confrontation, they managed to subdue the group, including the leader. Todoroki rushed to check on the individual on the ground, who lowered his head upon realizing his face was exposed. Bakugu, not looking directly at him, reassured him that his scars were not as severe as Todoroki's. Todoroki, observing the scene, received a glare from Bakugu but continued to assess the situation. He approached the person they had rescued, offering a black mask from his pocket. The individual accepted it and quickly put it on. Bakugu noticed the injuries on the person and bluntly suggested they seek medical attention before turning to leave. Todoroki smiled gently at the rescued individual and waved goodbye as he followed Bakugu. He recognized the person after they donned the mask but chose not to address it, wanting to avoid making them uncomfortable. The two exited the alley, realizing they were running late. Bakugu cursed himself for not finishing the fight sooner. Upon arriving at their destination, Bakugu's expression darkened at the sight of someone standing next to 𝗵𝗲 outside the arcade. Todoroki, sensing Bakugu's tension, glanced in the same direction and saw Kisaki with 𝗵𝗲. He took Bakugu's hand, guiding him toward the two. 𝗵𝗲 greeted them with a smile, and Todoroki returned the gesture while Bakugu, eager to break free from Todoroki's grip, glared at him. Once they reached the group, Todoroki released Bakugu's hand and turned to 𝗵𝗲 and Kisaki with a friendly smile, ready to begin their meeting. Todoroki observed the scene, while Bakugu sensed Kisaki's gaze on him. He redirected his attention, maintaining his glare as he stood tall and slipped his hands into his pockets. A smirk crossed his face when Kisaki looked away, feeling a sense of unease. Bakugu's voice cut through the air, startling Kisaki slightly with its intensity, which was more menacing than merely loud. He thought to himself that this would be entertaining. The four of them made their way to their hangout, entering the arcade behind them. Todoroki used his father's credit card to purchase tickets, surprising both Kisaki and 𝗵𝗲 with its distinctive color. He then asked what they wanted to try first. Bakugu remained silent, grabbing a toy gun attached to a nearby machine and playfully aiming it at Todoroki, declaring his intent with a smirk. The others exchanged glances, unsure of how to react, but Kisaki felt a twinge of fear, sensing that Bakugu's words, though meant in jest, carried an underlying seriousness. As Bakugu and Todoroki engaged in their game, 𝗵𝗲 and Kisaki joined in on another machine. Bakugu's smirk never faded, clearly enjoying the effect he had on Kisaki. After winning, he pointed the toy gun at Todoroki, gloating over his victory. Todoroki then turned to Kisaki and 𝗵𝗲, asking what they wanted to do next. 𝗵𝗲 suggested a dance machine, prompting Bakugu to rush over, urging Todoroki to join him. 𝗵𝗲 turned to Kisaki, noting that Todoroki was a great companion. Kisaki remained silent, watching as Todoroki inserted a coin to start the game. Bakugu, in a competitive spirit, challenged them, asking if they were going to stand by like spectators or try to beat him. 𝗵𝗲 responded that they were just discussing something, and the two competitive players continued their game while Todoroki and Kisaki snacked on treats Todoroki had bought earlier. Todoroki suggested they take a break, but Bakugu and 𝗵𝗲 ignored him. Frustrated, Kisaki stepped in front of them, blocking their view of the screen in an attempt to disrupt their focus. Bakugu, still fixated on the game, told him to move aside, but Kisaki stood his ground. Sighing, Todoroki joined him, still holding onto his snack. They continued to block the screen, and Todoroki could sense Bakugu's irritation growing. When they finally lost, Bakugu approached Todoroki, grabbing his collar and insisting he had been winning. 𝗵𝗲 chimed in, contradicting him, but Bakugu brushed it off, snatching the snacks from Todoroki's hands as he walked away. The others followed, contemplating their next move, while Bakugu sulked, a term Todoroki used to describe his mood. They decided to find a restaurant to eat before continuing their outing. 𝗵𝗲 inquired about the credit card, and Todoroki explained that it was a gift from his father, trying to avoid sounding suspicious. Kisaki asked about Todoroki's father's occupation, to which Todoroki replied that he didn't have a close relationship with him, hinting at the truth without revealing too much. 𝗵𝗲 then asked if the card ever ran out, and Todoroki shook his head, indicating it was not a concern. Upon arriving at the restaurant, Bakugu announced their destination, and the others looked up, impressed with the choice. As they entered, a waiter greeted Bakugu, leading them to a private room. Kisaki, confused, asked if Bakugu owned the place, but Todoroki clarified that they simply frequented it. Once seated, 𝗵𝗲 immediately took a chair, prompting 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 to scold him for his lack of manners. The waiter informed them he would retrieve the menu, and as they waited, Bakugu asked about 𝗵𝗲's profession. 𝗵𝗲 revealed he managed a gang, and Bakugu feigned interest, asking for the gang's name. 𝗵𝗲 mentioned Valhalla, noting he was only the vice leader. Bakugu pretended to recognize the name, and 𝗵𝗲 nodded, about to share something about 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 when the waiter returned with the menus. As the waiter handed them out, Todoroki stated they would stick with their usual orders, and Bakugu agreed. The waiter then turned to 𝗵𝗲 and 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏, awaiting their selections. Bakugu smirked at 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏, noticing his nervousness. 𝗵𝗲 pointed out his choices on the menu, and the waiter nodded, taking note. Sensing Bakugu's gaze on him, Todoroki sighed and pulled out his phone to send a message, while Bakugu felt his phone vibrate and opened it. Bakugu noticed Todoroki's name on his phone screen. He glanced at Todoroki, opened the message, and rolled his eyes at its content. As he typed a response, he locked eyes with Todoroki, who quickly looked back at his phone and replied after reading Bakugu's message. Their interaction caught 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏's attention, who was observing Bakugu. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 inquired if something was wrong, but Bakugu remained silent, focusing on his phone. Todoroki explained that they had received messages from friends and tucked his phone away. He felt Bakugu's glare but chose to ignore it. 𝗵𝗲 then asked where they were from, noting that they didn't seem local. Bakugu replied that they were from Shizuoka and had come to unwind. When 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 asked about their schooling, Todoroki mentioned he was homeschooled, while Bakugu stated he had finished early and wasn't currently taking classes. 𝗵𝗲 inquired about their plans for college, and Bakugu nodded in agreement. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 pressed further, curious about why they chose Shibuya. The two were aware that 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 was fishing for information, but they were careful to provide only vague or misleading answers as their conversation continued while waiting for their food. The group had been summoned to 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏's house by 𝐴KEN, who had mentioned being beaten up by the leader of the Black Dragons. As they rushed to 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏's place, Denki wondered if the leader had returned, while Sero shrugged in uncertainty. Upon arriving, they found 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 resting on his bed, with his friends and Chifuyu engaged in various activities. 𝐴KEN greeted them with a smile, and Sero asked about 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏's condition. Yamagishi reassured them that he was fine, just a bit worse for wear. Bakugu leaned against the study table at the foot of 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏's bed, while Kirishima perched on the edge of the bed, and Denki joined 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏's friend in a game. Sero stood behind them, and Todoroki approached Midoriya, who seemed lost in thought about a previous conversation. As 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 stirred awake, he mumbled to himself, unaware of the group in front of him. 𝐴KEN asked what he was mumbling about, and Yamagishi referred to him as 𝗓𝗓𝗄𝗏𝗄. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏, surprised to see everyone, asked what they were doing at his place. Bakugu bluntly stated they came to check on him, emphasizing his role as captain and urging him to be more self-aware. Mikoto added that if 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 continued to act recklessly, it would jeopardize the First Division's cohesion. A week prior, 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 had invited his friends to join the gang, which was now the First Division. Confused, he asked what they meant by "we," prompting 𝐴KEN and Yamagishi to confirm they had joined Toumon. Chifuyu pointed out that 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 had personally invited them, and as 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 paused, Todoroki sensed he was withholding something but refrained from asking in front of their friends. Chifuyu pressed for an explanation, and Midoriya expressed concern for 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏's well-being. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 insisted it was nothing, but 𝐴KEN remarked on the disruption caused by the Black Dragons, leading to a discussion about the impending challenges. Yamagishi agreed that things were about to get complicated, and Mikoto noted that the higher-ups would likely intervene. Chifuyu explained that 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 was now a captain in Toumon, a gang that had grown significantly after absorbing Valhalla. He emphasized that 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 being beaten by the Black Dragons could spark a conflict. Takuya warned that any fight with the Black Dragons would be unlike anything they had faced before, as they were known for their fierce fighting reputation. Midoriya took notes as Chifuyu elaborated on the history of the Black Dragons, detailing how they had been a DMNT gang in the Kanto region for generations, with the 10th iteration being particularly notorious. Chifuyu highlighted that Toumon was formed to support a member who had clashed with the Black Dragons, and their subsequent victory had established Toumon's reputation. Denki remarked on the impressive nature of 𝗵𝗏's rise, while Yamagishi optimistically suggested that their next fight would be easy. Chifuyu countered that defeating the 9th Black Dragons had been a challenge. Bakugo confidently declared his intent to defeat them all. Chifuyu explained that the Black Dragons had been revitalized under Taiju Shiba, who had revamped their uniforms and trained the members to operate like a military unit. Yamagishi admired Taiju's leadership, but 𝗧𝗏 pointed out that the costs of such an operation must be substantial. The group speculated on Taiju's age and wealth, with Chifuyu revealing that he was only 2 years older than them and had connections to the affluent, profiting from his gang's strength. Kirishima expressed concern over the morality of Taiju's actions, while Denki commented on the troubling nature of his methods. Chifuyu concluded that Taiju was not an ordinary thug. He had built a powerful organization through strategic alliances and financial gain. Yamagishi observed that it seemed like a troubled child was involved. Mikoto commented that the situation felt as if it were from another world. This remark caused the group to sweat, particularly Denki and Midoriya. Bakugo exchanged a glance with Kirishima, while 𝗧𝗏 and Todoroki made eye contact. Takemichi felt tense upon hearing the comment but relaxed when he looked at his friends. Chifuyu pointed out that the current Black Dragons were entirely different from the 9th generation. Akin added that if 𝗵𝗏 faced them now, there would be casualties. Takemichi interjected, insisting that they didn't need to fight. The group turned to him, puzzled by his statement. Bakugo muttered in disbelief, and Kirishima placed his arm in front of him, shaking his head. Takemichi explained that this conflict was between him and the Black Dragons and had nothing to do with 𝗵𝗏. He intended to handle it on his own. Denki and Yamagishi expressed their surprise at his words, while Bakugo and Mikoto echoed their confusion. Takemichi apologized, and Chifuyu stood up, heading towards the door and calling for Takemichi to join him. Once outside, the group remained behind, wanting to discuss what they had just heard. They decided to leave the house and went to a nearby park. Denki broke the silence, expressing his concern that they might be stuck there. 𝗧𝗏 leaned against the metal bars of the swings, agreeing that it could be a problem. Kirishima suggested investigating, turning to Midoriya for input. Midoriya admitted uncertainty about what they would do if they were indeed stuck. Kirishima remarked that they would have to live their lives until the end. He added that they needed to wait for Takemichi to share the future he had seen and devise a plan to make it appear as if they had returned to their hometown when the time came. Bakugo questioned how they would accomplish that, pointing out their lack of knowledge about returning home. Midoriya mentioned he had some ideas in his notebook, which he opened on his lap. Todoroki leaned over to read it, nodding in approval, while the others gathered closer to see Midoriya's notes. Bakugo glared at Takemichi, clearly frustrated. The following day, they gathered at Takemichi's house to learn about the future. Takemichi revealed that he had informed Chifuyu about his quirk during their outing. Kirishima noted that this meant Chifuyu could be trusted. 𝗧𝗏 reassured Takemichi that he now had another ally. Takemichi expressed his confusion about the Black Dragons, who were different from those Mikey and the others had faced before. Kirishima placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, while Denki smiled, reminding him that they and Chifuyu were there for him. Denki then looked at the others, sensing something was amiss. Takemichi, confused, asked what was going on. 𝗧𝗏 scratched the back of his head, and Kirishima began to explain about Kazutora. Takemichi's expression shifted from confusion to worry as he inquired about Kazutora's well-being. Midoriya quickly denied any bad news, clarifying that they had helped him out of juvenile detention. Bakugo placed a tray of snacks on the coffee table, and Takemichi asked where Kazutora was now. Bakugo informed him that Kazutora was in the apartment, accompanied by Todoroki. Denki assured Takemichi that Kazutora was all right, and Takemichi expressed his gratitude. Kirishima reminded him that there was no need to thank them, as helping others was what heroes did. Takemichi scratched his head, recalling that he had almost forgotten about that. He then inquired if they had found a way to return home. 𝗧𝗏 shook his head, explaining that their only path home was by assisting Takemichi. Midoriya added that they had a plan to make it appear as if they had returned to their hometown, alleviating some of Takemichi's worries. Kirishima presented a letter they had prepared, which Takemichi read. With a smile, appreciating the effort. Kirishima pointed out that Midoriya had come up with the idea, as he continued to jot down notes. They planned to leave a letter for Takemichi's past self to prevent any confusion about their whereabouts after their disappearance. Takemichi felt emotional, expressing that he would miss them. Denki nodded in agreement, and they shared a moment of camaraderie. Zero mentioned that they might find a way to visit him since they had quirks. Takemichi acknowledged that it had been comforting to know he wasn't alone in this situation. A few hours later, as they prepared to leave Takemichi's place, Denki wished him luck for the meeting, reminding him they would be available if needed. Kirishima looked up at the sky, realizing it was almost Christmas. Denki noted that they would celebrate the holiday with just themselves and Kazutora. Kirishima remarked that it was a nice change, while Denki added that they usually missed family time during the holidays due to hero work. Midoriya suggested they investigate on their own, but he was unsure. Zero proposed asking Chifuyu about the meeting, and Kirishima agreed, prompting Midoriya to jot it down in his notebook. On November 18, 2017, after his conversation with Takemichi, Todoroki left the cemetery and approached Hanma's car. Hanma, waiting in the driver's seat, greeted him as he entered. Todoroki could only think as Hanma began to drive. He gazed out the window beside him while Hanma glanced at him through the rearview mirror and asked if he was sure about their decision. Before Todoroki could respond, Hanma's phone rang, and he answered it without checking the caller ID. Todoroki continued to look out the window, a small smile forming as he thought of his friends. It had been exactly 12 years since they arrived in this world, and 12 years since he had last seen them. They had lost interest in their quirks long ago and stopped hoping for rescue after the deaths of Midoriya and Baji. The group had split, severing ties with Tomoe, but they still kept in touch with Chifuyu, who had informed them about Emma's passing. Tomoe had been run over by Kisaki while they hid to avoid being found and harmed. Todoroki had cut ties with the group to honor his promise to Baji, who had asked him to take care of Mikey before he died. Todoroki, who had dyed his hair black to conceal his scar, stood by Mikey's side to help him resist his darker impulses. They learned about the situation through Draken, who was currently in jail after attempting to avenge Emma. Mitsuya, who had left Tomoe, joined their gang, which Bakugo had created with Chifuyu and Kazutora as executives, along with Zero and Denki as informants. Mitsuya served as an advisor alongside Kirishima. Although the gang had been absorbed 5 years ago, Todoroki never imagined they would be leading a gang in this world. He wanted to stay by Mikey's side, as he had promised Baji, and he was determined to keep that promise. With Chifuyu now gone and Takemichi just returning from the past, Tomoe had become a malevolent organization under Kisaki's influence. Mikey could only hold back his dark impulses for so long with Todoroki's support. As Hanma ended the call, he looked at Todoroki through the rearview mirror and sighed before refocusing on the road. He mentioned that he could tell Mikey he had failed, but Todoroki preferred not to put him through that. He smiled and reminded Hanma that they were friends. Hanma was surprised by this but smiled back, though he cautioned that the others might not approve of Todoroki's actions. Todoroki gazed out the window, remembering that he had left the gang to protect Mikey, not wanting his friends to be in danger. He had taken it upon himself to distance from them, becoming an important figure in Tomoe because Mikey believed he was his brother, Shinichiro. Todoroki didn't mind being used as long as his friends were safe. He wanted to ensure nothing bad happened to them, especially after all he had endured. Upon arriving at Tomoe's headquarters, the employees greeted them quickly. Todoroki followed Hanma into the elevator, where Hanma pressed the button for the top floor. Once they arrived, Todoroki saw Chifuyu's lifeless body being placed in a black body bag. 2 people were beginning to clean up the aftermath of Kisaki's actions, while Kisaki himself looked out of the large glass window beside him. Hanma greeted Kisaki, informing him that Todoroki was back. Kisaki smiled upon seeing him and mentioned that Mikey was waiting for him on the roof. Todoroki nodded and made his way to the rooftop, taking the stairs this time. He opened the door to find Mikey standing at the edge of the roof. As he approached, Mikey turned to him and asked him not to leave again. Todoroki could only smile as Mikey came closer. Meanwhile, in another part of Shibuya, a raven-haired man with his hair tied in a low ponytail remarked that they had lost another member. He wore a white long-sleeve polo with the sleeves loosely folded to his elbows, a black vest, and a black tie. A blonde-haired male with a black streak in his hair, styled in a wolf cut, followed up with a comment about the unfortunate situation. He wore a yellow hoodie, a denim vest, black cargo pants, and black sneakers. A deep voice then asked about the status of the situation. The speaker had blonde hair tied in a low ponytail and piercing red eyes, dressed in a black long-sleeve polo with neatly tucked sleeves, black pants, and combat boots. He sat behind a desk in the middle of the room. A girl with light pink hair and emerald green eyes, dressed in a black gang uniform with white designs, answered that the individual was currently with 𝗳𝗏. The red-haired male turned to the one behind the desk and inquired if he was going there. The blonde male confirmed he would be going and instructed the red-haired male to call someone down. The blonde male then stood up, carrying a laptop, and mentioned he would continue hacking their systems. He smiled at the light pink-haired girl, asking her to send his regards to 𝗏𝗏, Bnha, and 𝗏𝗏 as he left the room. She nodded, watching him go. Realizing it was also her cue to leave. She stood up from the sofa where she had been sitting and waved goodbye as she exited the room, saying she would see Katsu later. The blonde male left behind rose from his seat and crossed his arms while gazing out the large glass window. It had been years since they last saw Todoroki, who had left after Mitsuya joined 5 years ago. After they absorbed the gang known as Brahmin, the gang sought to join them upon discovering their existence. The leader, Senju Akashi, also known as Senju Kawaragi in the delinquent world, wanted to repay them for saving her life during the Three Deities War. Although the group initially wished to avoid the conflict, Дракон was a member of that gang at the time, and they couldn't just stand by, concerned for his safety. They ended up saving Senju unintentionally. The group was also shocked to learn that her own brother, Haruchio Akashi, known as Haruchio Sanzu in the delinquent world, was attempting to harm her. He was still with Tomon under Mucho's division. They had lost Emma during the Tenjiku vs Tomon battle, which was partly due to Takemichi being caught in one of his I'm the past phases. It frustrated him when Takemichi refused to help, especially since it was past Takemichi who was unaware of the situation and chose not to join the fight, leading his friends to follow suit. Without Midoriya, they felt lost, as he was the one with all the strategies for such scenarios. Only Todoroki joined the battle, later informing them of what had transpired. Yuzuha, the younger sister of Hakai and Taiju, also joined them after losing Taiju. She felt lost, especially after Kisaki manipulated Hakai into becoming the leader of Black Dragon. She ran away and found her way to them through Mitsuya. The blonde male furrowed his brow before deciding to leave the room. He grabbed his black blazer from the chair and headed straight to the parking lot. Upon arrival, he spotted a ginger-haired woman waiting for him alongside a redhead. When they noticed him, they smiled. The redhead asked if he was ready to go, and he simply entered the car, stating it was time to leave. The two followed suit, with the redhead driving while the woman sat in the passenger seat. They exchanged quick glances through the rearview mirror as they drove out of the parking lot. Meanwhile, Kaminari made his way to the large living room on the 10th floor, where a silver lilac-haired male with a wolf cut emerged from one of the hallways and greeted him. He informed Kaminari that the meeting had concluded, and he believed Bakugo was planning to visit their graves that day. The male sat beside Kaminari, glancing at the laptop on his lap and asking if he could bring Luna and Mana along. Kaminari nodded, assuring him that Senju and Yuzuha wouldn't mind. The male confirmed he would bring them the next day. Kaminari then inquired about his plans for the day, to which the male replied he might visit Дракон early in the morning. Kaminari expressed his intention to join, stating he had nothing else to do. The male checked his watch and noted it was already lunchtime, suggesting they grab something to eat. Kaminari agreed, jokingly stating he would only go if the male was paying. The male chuckled, remarking that he wouldn't invite him if he weren't covering the bill. 2 days later, the group met with Chifuyu at a nearby cafe to discuss the meeting, as Takemichi had not shared his next move or plan, causing them concern. Chifuyu noticed they seemed preoccupied and asked if everything was all right. Midoriya smiled and assured him they were fine. Chifuyu then inquired about the reason for their visit. They expressed their curiosity about whether Takemichi had shared anything with him. Chifuyu confirmed that he had indeed mentioned a plan. Kirishima noticed Bakugo's furrowed brow, worried he might react strongly, and placed a hand on his shoulder, urging him to calm down. Bakugo demanded to know the plan, and Chifuyu explained that they had teamed up with Kisaki and Hanma to take down Taiju. This revelation surprised everyone, prompting Bakugo to react loudly, drawing the attention of nearby customers. Chifuyu clarified that he had not wanted to partner with Kisaki after their past encounters. Midoriya requested more details about the plan, and Chifuyu agreed to share. After learning about Takemichi's strategy from Chifuyu, they departed and returned to their apartment. Zero remarked on Takemichi's tendency to act heroically on his own, while Midoriya defended him, suggesting he only wanted to protect them without involving them in danger. Bakugo countered that it was unfair for Takemichi to make decisions for them. Zero advised against confronting Takemichi, and Kirishima suggested they wait and offer their help when the time came. Bakugo, frustrated, stormed off. Zero wondered what the others were doing, and Denki speculated they were still searching for them. Midoriya expressed concern for their safety, but Kirishima reassured him, placing an arm around him. Denki echoed the sentiment, and Zero optimistically stated they would return home soon. Bakugo's voice called out from a distance, urging them to hurry. Kirishima encouraged everyone to move quickly, and they ran to catch up with him. On the day of the battle, the group split up, donning disguises. Bakugo and Kirishima stood by at the shrine, using Bakugo's bike, while Midoriya, Zero, and Denki arrived at the church much earlier than the others, preparing for the battle that awaited them, based on the information gathered from Chifuyu 2 days prior. Denki remarked that he missed wearing their outfits, and the others nodded in agreement. Back home, they wore it every day. Zero turned to his friends with a smile. Denki was dressed in his hero costume but had swapped his white shirt for a black hoodie and wore a black mask to conceal his face. His outfit resembled casual clothes, making it easy to wear outside if he chose to. Unlike the others, whose hero costumes looked more like they were heading to a costume party. The door to the church opened, prompting the three of them to stop talking and peek around the wall. They were on the second floor, trying to remain unseen. They watched as Hakai entered, dressed in a long white garment. Denki pointed out the logo on the back of Hakai's clothing, which read BD in black, as he walked toward the front of the altar. Midoriya quietly noted that it seemed Hakai had left Tamon after all, and Denki agreed. The door opened again, and Takemichi stepped inside, surprising Hakai. The three friends moved closer to eavesdrop on their conversation. Hakai asked Takemichi what he was doing there, and Takemichi replied that he had come to stop him. Midoriya muttered that they had the same intention, and the others nodded in agreement. Hakai explained that he hadn't spoken to Takemichi to seek help but to strengthen his own resolve. He warned that if Takemichi got in his way, he would have to face the consequences. Denki remarked that Hakai really seemed to be serious about his intentions. Midoriya added that even if Hakai felt wronged, taking a life was not the solution. Zero nodded in agreement. Takemichi insisted that Hakai wouldn't go through with it. Hakai appeared confused by this. Takemichi continued, explaining that whenever he shared his worries, it was because he felt lost. Zero observed the unfolding scene, noting that they all had their struggles. Takemichi expressed understanding of Hakai's feelings, suggesting that he believed killing Taiju was the only way to stop his tyranny. However, he emphasized that murder wouldn't protect anyone. Zero agreed, and Denki remarked that if Takemichi lived in their world, he would make a great hero. Midoriya thought to himself that he already was, whether or not he had a quirk. Takemichi then asked Hakai if he wanted to protect his sister. Hakai angrily questioned what Takemichi knew about his situation. Takemichi admitted he didn't know much, which was why he wanted to help. Hakai began to recount his troubles at home, describing the harsh treatment he received. Denki commented on the severity of Hakai's situation, and Zero nodded in agreement, recognizing it as abusive behavior. Hakai dismissed Takemichi, insisting he couldn't be stopped. Takemichi revealed that he had broken up with Hina, shocking the three listeners. They were surprised by the news, questioning why he would do such a thing when it was clear he cared for her. Midoriya suggested there must be a reason, and Zero agreed. Takemichi explained that he had done it to protect her, acknowledging his own weaknesses but affirming his longing to keep her safe. Midoriya reflected on their shared vulnerabilities, while 𝐬𝐻 noted that some people merely pretended to be strong. 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 declared that despite his hatred for his enemies, he would never take a life. Denki cheered him on quietly. 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 asserted that he would never do anything to make Hina sad, questioning Hakai if he thought becoming a murderer would make Yuzuru happy. Just then, the door to the church opened again, drawing their attention. They turned to see who had entered, feeling uneasy. The newcomer began to pray as he walked toward them, and Midoriya noticed Hakai glaring at him. He warned the others that it was Taiju. The atmosphere shifted as Taiju questioned what they were doing there. Suddenly, Hakai pulled out a knife and rushed toward Taiju, prompting Midoriya to suggest they leave. As they made their way toward the stairs, Denki hesitated, sensing something amiss. He decided to investigate a nearby door, while Midoriya and 𝗬𝐻 followed him. They wandered through the corridors, searching for the source of the sound. Denki pushed open a door, revealing Chifuyu tied to a pole. Midoriya expressed surprise, and Chifuyu looked at them in confusion. The three friends realized they were still masked and hooded. Denki asked what they should do, noticing Chifuyu tense at their presence. Midoriya decided they needed to free him and approached, assuring Chifuyu that they were not enemies. After untying him, they left without another word, and Chifuyu went to check on 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸. It seemed they had arrived just in time. 𝗬𝐻 spotted Mitsuya and a girl involved in a fight and wondered who she was. Denki speculated that she was probably Hakai's sister. Midoriya, feeling the urgency of the situation, jumped onto the railings and informed them that he was ready to jump down if things escalated. 𝗬𝐻 joined him on the railings, and Denki followed suit as they observed the unfolding chaos. A loud roar echoed as the fight intensified, and Denki pointed out that Chifuyu had arrived just in time. The two friends turned to see Chifuyu speaking with 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸. 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 expressed his relief at seeing Chifuyu safe, who explained that he had been tied up by Kisaki and Hanma but was rescued. Denki noted that Chifuyu must have contacted Mitsuya even before they arrived. Midoriya was busy on his phone, informing Bakugo and Kirishima to ensure Mikey and Draken arrived in case Taiju summoned backup. As they watched, Mitsuya knelt on the ground, and Taiju smirked, boasting about his strength. Hakai, concerned for Mitsuya, urged him not to engage, but Denki sarcastically commented on Hakai's lack of encouragement. Suddenly, Denki pointed out someone in a white uniform similar to Hakai and Taiju's. Midoriya stood up, observing as Taiju called the person by name. The newcomer raised a metal pipe behind Mitsuya, but before they could strike, someone intervened. A figure with long black hair leaped in to protect Mitsuya, landing with a thud. Midoriya recognized the person as Inui, who locked eyes with him, revealing only his green eyes beneath his hood. Chifuyu was surprised to see Baji in front of Mitsuya and questioned his presence. 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸, equally astonished, wondered how they had known about the fight. He had tried to keep them away, fearing for their safety. Midoriya exchanged a knowing glance with 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸, assuring him he was okay. The trio then noticed the girl, assumed to be Hakai's sister, standing up with a knife, rushing toward Baji. Chifuyu and 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 shouted in alarm as Midoriya stepped in front of Baji, taking the blow instead. Mitsuya looked at the girl in shock, while 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸 gasped at what he had witnessed. Midoriya calmly pulled the knife from his side, surprising everyone with his resilience. The girl was taken aback by his nonchalance, and he questioned her motives, suspecting Kisaki had manipulated her into attacking Baji. When she remained silent, he expressed his frustration. Midoriya instructed 𝗬𝐻 and Denki to check the perimeter, and they quickly complied. Just then, a figure with black hair appeared, wearing the same uniform as Hakai and the others. He questioned whether his information had been helpful, despite their plan failing. Taiju laughed, eager to escalate the violence. Midoriya reassured the girl, asking if she was all right, to which she replied that he should be the one concerned. He smiled, affirming his well-being, and then helped Mitsuya to his feet, supporting him. Baji joined in, and Midoriya nodded at 𝗧𝗵𝐻𝐸, who prepared to confront Taiju alone. He urged the others to stay back, assuring them that help would arrive soon. Chifuyu noticed Taiju kneeling, which surprised everyone. Yuzuru asked if they could hear Mikey's bike approaching, and Midoriya smirked, recognizing the sound. He dashed out of the chapel, spotting numerous Black Dragon members waiting for them. Kirishima and Bakugo arrived, apologizing for their late arrival. Midoriya turned to Bakugo, ready to confront their opponents. As Bakugo charged into the fray, Midoriya inquired about Mikey and Draken's whereabouts. Kirishima pointed them out, noting that Draken was handling several Black Dragon members while Mikey walked past them. Zero and Denki joined them, and Midoriya decided they needed to focus on the fight at hand. Despite Denki's concern about Midoriya's injury, he charged into battle, throwing punches at the Black Dragon members. Bakugo, realizing Midoriya had been hurt, rushed after him, calling out his name. Kirishima followed, but they were quickly surrounded by more enemies. Denki shouted that Midoriya needed medical attention, but Bakugo was already too far ahead, determined to protect his friend. Denki fought off the members of the Black Dragons, delivering kicks and punches as he wondered about the situation. Zero joined in, landing a kick to one of the attackers and expressing his hope that their friend would be alright. Kirishima, after dispatching another foe, turned his attention to Midoriya and Bakugo, urging them to seek medical attention. Bakugo, frustrated with Midoriya's lack of concern for his injury, insisted on taking him to the hospital, grabbing him by the collar. Midoriya, determined to stay in the fight, managed to flip himself free and land back on the ground, prompting Bakugo's irritation as he questioned Midoriya's stubbornness. Despite Bakugo's warnings, Midoriya continued to fend off the attackers. Bakugo, gritting his teeth, struck another enemy before turning away, only to hear a thud behind him. When he looked back, he saw Midoriya on the ground, a pool of blood forming around him as the rain fell. Bakugo rushed to his side, fighting off any remaining threats, and lifted Midoriya onto his back, declaring his intention to take him to the hospital. His friends looked on, unsure whether to follow or stay behind to support Takemichi in his mission. As Bakugo sped away on his bike with Midoriya, the others decided to remain, hoping Takemichi would succeed in saving Hakai without further harm. Moments later, they spotted Taiju, who had emerged from the church, staring at them in disbelief. Kirishima approached him, asking if everything was resolved, while Draken, seated on the stairs, commended their efforts and requested that Taiju inform Mikey. Zero joined Kirishima, and they prepared to leave, with Denki following suit after releasing his grip on a defeated enemy. The group exchanged words of relief, expressing hope for Midoriya's well-being. Just then, Mikey and the others exited the church, witnessing the aftermath of their victory. Takemichi, however, fainted, causing concern among his friends. Mitsuya reassured them that he would be fine. The sound of approaching motorcycles drew their attention, and they watched as 3 riders arrived. The first rider removed his helmet, revealing Todoroki, who greeted Denki and offered assistance. Chifuyu and another rider, Kami, joined them, with Kirishima recognizing Kami's name from their past. Denki informed them that Bakugo had taken Midoriya to the hospital, prompting concern from Draken and Yuzuha. Zero reassured Yuzuha that Midoriya would be okay, and Kirishima promised to update them on his condition. As the riders prepared to leave, Denki hopped onto Todoroki's bike, and the group exchanged farewells. Upon arriving at the hospital, they found Bakugo waiting outside the operating room, visibly anxious. Kirishima approached him, seeking information about Midoriya's condition. Bakugo, frustrated and worried, admitted he had no updates since bringing Midoriya in. Zero suggested they sit and distract themselves while they waited, and the group settled into chairs in the hallway. Kazutora brought them drinks as Todoroki and Kami explained their presence. Just as Kirishima inquired about who else was there, the doctor emerged, announcing that Midoriya was stable and would wake up soon. The doctor informed them that they would transfer Bakugo to his room. The group sighed in relief upon hearing this and turned to Kirishima, who nodded as he prepared to head towards Bakugo. He mentioned that he would see them back at the apartment. The group nodded and left the hospital with Kazutora. Once they arrived at the apartment, they were surprised to find not only Uraraka but also Mina and Zu in the living room. Denki spoke up, catching the girls' attention. Uraraka greeted them, expressing her relief that they were all right. Zu asked how they had arrived, just as Kazutora entered his room. Uraraka explained that they had been sent to track down the villain responsible for their situation and that they had found Todoroki with Kazutora after a brief search. Todoroki confirmed her statement. 𝗧𝗏 inquired about how long they had been missing, to which Cammy responded that it had been a year. Denki was taken aback by this revelation. 𝗬 elaborated that they had been searching for them all that time without any leads. 𝗧𝗏 turned to Todoroki and Denki, suggesting they needed to return to their previous situation. He then sat beside 𝗬 on the sofa, and Cammy, sitting next to Mina on the floor, expressed her interest in hearing their story. The boys began to explain everything that had happened, leaving the girls amazed and concerned, especially regarding the battles they had faced. They shared the details of how they had been sent to another dimension without their quirks and had traveled back in time. They also clarified why Bakugo and Kirishima were not with them, and the girls expressed a longing to visit Midoriya the next day, which the boys agreed to, knowing Bakugo and Kirishima would still be in the hospital. 𝗬 remarked that at least they still had their quirks, and Mina pointed out that she was no longer pink. 𝗧𝗏 suggested they make themselves at home, and Denki mentioned they could take the girls shopping later. Uraraka reminded them that it was Christmas, prompting 𝗬 to ask about their plans. 𝗧𝗏 admitted they had none. Just then, Todoroki's phone chimed, indicating a new message. Denki leaned over to read it and announced that they had been invited by Chifuyu. Cammy shrugged and suggested they should go. With their plans set, Denki stood up and pulled 𝗧𝗏 along, telling the others goodnight as they headed to their room. Todoroki informed the girls that if they needed anything, they could knock on the door of the room he shared with Midoriya. Cammy waved goodbye as the boys left, and she turned to the girls, asking who was ready for a sleepover. Mina raised her hand enthusiastically, and Uraraka confirmed they would have a sleepover, with 𝗬 nodding in agreement. The next morning, the group visited the hospital to check on Midoriya. Kirishima was on the couch in the room while Bakugo slept beside Midoriya's bed. Kirishima greeted them with a small smile, and 𝗧𝗏 asked about Midoriya's condition. Kirishima reassured them that he was fine, but Bakugo had not left his side. 𝗧𝗏 suggested the girls take over, and they nodded in agreement. Mina took Kirishima's hand, surprising him as she urged him to leave the room with the girls. Cammy wished them good luck with a smile before following the others out. 𝗧𝗏 and Kirishima exchanged glances, while Todoroki sat on the sofa, and Kazutora averted his gaze from Midoriya, not wanting to recall painful memories. Denki broke the silence, asking if they should do something. 𝗧𝗏 nodded and approached Bakugo, gently shaking him awake. He informed Bakugo that it was time to head home. Bakugo stirred, lifting his head and squinting at them, confused. 𝗧𝗏 reassured him that they would take care of things. Kazutora stepped forward, offering to assist Bakugo. As Bakugo sat up, he ruffled his hair and asked what time it was. Denki informed him it was 9 a.m., mentioning that the girls wanted to visit early. Kazutora placed a hand on Bakugo's shoulder, guiding him as they left the room. Once the door closed, Denki took a seat in the chair Bakugo had occupied. Later, the gang visited after lunch. Takemichi wanted to stay but was encouraged to relax for a day, given the stress of time travel and saving his friends. 𝗧𝗏 asked Denki what was for dinner, but Denki shrugged, unsure. 𝗧𝗏 noted that Shoto and Kazutora were taking their time, having been out for over an hour. He stood up to check on them, leaving Denki alone with Midoriya, who remained unconscious. Denki pulled out his phone, scrolling through his gallery, missing their other friends but aware they couldn't communicate with their classmates in a different world. The next day, the girls, Bakugo, and Kirishima were all together again. Cammy spotted Bakugo as he emerged from the hallway, clearly bewildered by their presence. He exclaimed in disbelief, questioning how they had arrived. Kirishima, who had been in the kitchen, stepped in and guided Bakugo to the living room, urging him to sit beside Cammy. Uraraka began to explain their situation, capturing Bakugo's attention. The girls detailed how they had ended up there, and Bakugo processed their words, inquiring about the others who were not present. Uraraka expressed their concern, mentioning how it had been a year and how worried they all were. Mina nodded in agreement, sharing that they had feared they would never see each other again. Kirishima chimed in, suggesting that the others must be even more anxious now that they were reunited. Mina added that the others might think they had been sent to a different dimension. Kirishima expressed relief that they had ended up in the same place as Bakugo and the others, while 𝗬 voiced her hope that everyone else was okay. A moment of silence enveloped the apartment before 𝗓𝗓𝗄𝐻 stood up, trying to lighten the mood by asking if anyone wanted breakfast. Bakugo, eager to eat, quickly made his way to the kitchen, prompting Mina to call out and follow him. 𝗓𝗓𝗄𝐻 then wondered where Todoroki was, noting his absence. Uraraka mentioned that he had likely gone out with Kazutora. 𝗓𝗓𝗄𝐻, unsure of their whereabouts, shrugged, while Bakugo remained silent, keeping his thoughts to himself. He had an inkling of where Todoroki might be but chose to keep it a secret for now. As Bakugo contemplated his childhood friend, a wave of unease washed over him, causing him to lose his appetite. He stood abruptly, scraping his chair against the floor, and headed to the sink to place his plate down before retreating to his room, avoiding any questions from the others. He had wanted to return to the hospital right after the girls and Kazutora had brought him and 𝗓𝗓𝗄𝐻 home, but fatigue had overtaken him, leading him to sleep instead. He awoke that morning in confusion, unsure of how he had ended up in his room until Kazutora knocked and filled him in on the previous night's events. Bakugo suspected Todoroki had gone with Kazutora if they had left so early. With his mind racing with thoughts about their next plan and the uncertainty of what lay ahead, he dressed and exited the apartment, determined not to let anyone stop him. He was no longer a child in need of protection, he could handle himself. Unsure of his destination, he allowed his feet to lead him, eventually arriving at an arcade. Once inside, he purchased tickets and engaged with the machines, hoping to distract himself from his troubling thoughts. He spent 3 hours at the arcade, surprised that he hadn't run out of money, especially since Todoroki had shared some funds when they decided to split the card they had before the others arrived in this world. They had both agreed that applying for jobs was a waste of time when they should be focusing on finding a way back home, but things had not gone as planned. Finally, Bakugo decided to leave the arcade after spending an extended PRD on a single machine. As he made his way to the exit, he noticed 2 girls in front of a claw machine filled with purple bunny plushes. The girls had silver lilac hair, and one was taller than the other. They appeared eager to win a plushie. Bakugo crouched down to their level and offered to help them. The girls looked surprised but nodded in agreement. He asked which one they wanted, and the shorter girl pointed to a bunny holding a red guitar. With a smile, Bakugo patted her head before inserting a coin into the machine. The girls watched intently as he maneuvered the claw, and they hid behind him, anxious about the outcome. Bakugo grinned as the claw successfully grabbed the plush and dropped it into the prize area. He crouched down again, presenting the plush to the girls. The shorter girl squealed with delight as she hugged the plush tightly, while the other girl smiled at her joy. Bakugo, feeling a sense of camaraderie, introduced himself as Katsuki and asked for their names. The taller girl replied that she was Luna and introduced her friend as Mana. Bakugo offered to get them something else since he still had plenty of tokens. The girls looked around the arcade, and he followed them with a smile, drawing curious glances from other patrons who assumed they were his younger siblings. He ended up getting each of them a plush before suggesting they head to a nearby restaurant for a meal. As he observed the girls more closely, they reminded him of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. He learned that they had wanted to go out but their older brother was not home, leading him to think they might have wandered off. Realizing he should probably take them home, Bakugo clicked his tongue in frustration. He had intended to visit the hospital, but fate seemed to have other plans. Checking the time on his watch, he stood up and declared that they should go, as their brother must be searching for them. He spoke, and the two nodded. Mana tugged on the end of his shirt, prompting him to look down at her. He crouched to her level and asked if something was wrong. She hid her face behind the plush toy in her hands and quietly requested to be carried by Katsune. Bakugo smiled and ruffled her hair, agreeing to carry her. When she hugged him, it was clear she wanted to be held in the usual way. He effortlessly lifted her as he stood up, grabbing one of Luna's hands before leaving the restaurant, indifferent to the curious stares from onlookers. He thought to himself about how people seemed to have nothing better to do than stare. Once outside the restaurant, they walked toward Shibuya's neighborhood when his phone rang. Releasing Luna's hand, he took his phone out of his pocket. The two girls watched him with curiosity as they paused in front of a small, empty park. He answered the call politely, not having checked the caller ID beforehand. Kirishima's voice came through, asking where Bakugo was. Other voices could be heard in the background, but Bakugo was too focused on the kids to think about who Kirishima was with. He sensed a pit of anxiety in his stomach, worrying that the call might be about Deku or the others. Kirishima informed him that they were at Tamon's meeting place and that Mitsuya's siblings were missing. Bakugo glanced at the two kids with him and instructed Kirishima to come to the address he would send before ending the call. He tucked his phone back into his pocket and took hold of Luna's hand, which was gripping the end of his shirt. As they entered the small park, the kids looked at him, puzzled about why they were there. Mana tilted her head and asked why they had come to the park. Bakugo simply replied that they were waiting for her brother. He then sat on one of the swings, placing her on his right thigh, while Luna took the swing next to him. She asked if he knew their Nii-san, and he nodded, explaining that they were part of the same group of friends. He doubted the kids understood what a gang was, so he chose to keep it simple. An ice cream truck pulled up in front of them, and kids began to gather around it as it played its familiar tune. Bakugo smiled at the two, noticing the excitement in their eyes. He asked if they wanted ice cream, and they eagerly nodded. Ruffling their hair, he stood up, lifting Mana into his arms while holding Luna's left hand as they walked toward the truck. The driver greeted them with a smile and asked what flavors they wanted. Bakugo looked at the menu with the two, noticing a kid standing at the back, looking down at his feet. Frowning, he decided to order an ice cream for him as well. Mana pointed out that she wanted strawberry, while Luna requested chocolate. Bakugo placed the order for 1 strawberry, 1 chocolate chip, and 1 cookies and cream. Once their order was ready, the driver handed the cones to the kids. Bakugo encouraged Luna to take the extra cone he had ordered for the other kid and urged her to give it to him. Luna approached the boy, who seemed surprised, and extended her hand with the ice cream, explaining that Katsune said she should give it to him. The boy looked at Bakugo, who nodded with a smile, unaware of a group approaching them. The boy hesitantly accepted the ice cream, and Luna returned to Bakugo, but stopped when she heard someone calling her name. Mitsuya and the rest of Tamon, along with his friends, were running toward them. Luna dashed to her brother, who lifted her up, while Tamon and his friends looked at Bakugo. He ignored their gazes and set Mana down, who immediately ran to Mitsuya. Bakugo knelt in front of the boy, asking if he was all right. The child appeared to have run away from home, with bruises visible on his face, arms, and legs. Bakugo hoped for the best but felt uneasy about the situation. The boy didn't respond, continuing to eat the ice cream. After a moment, he nodded without looking up. Bakugo ruffled the boy's hair, wishing he was telling the truth, and advised him to go home, as his parents must be worried. The boy muttered that he didn't have parents. Bakugo frowned at this when a woman's voice called out, stopping in front of him. She thanked him, explaining that she had been searching everywhere for the boy. He hid behind her legs, peeking out to look at Bakugo. Bakugo managed a response, and the woman told the boy to stop hanging out with those friends of his. Bakugo smiled and ruffled the boy's hair again, wishing him safety. The woman expressed her gratitude once more before leaving, and Bakugo watched them disappear before approaching Mitsuya and the others. Mana lifted up the plushie she had received, excitedly showing it off. Bakugo stood in front of them, while his friends looked surprised that he wasn't angry or shouting. Mitsuya thanked him for finding the kids, and Bakugo replied that it was nothing, explaining that he had seen them in the arcade and felt compelled to approach them. Luna nodded in agreement, and Mana raised her arms to be picked up again. Bakugo smiled and lifted her, looking at the others, who seemed astonished. He pointed toward the truck parked in front of the park, and Mikey, hearing this, immediately ran toward it, with Draken following closely behind, urging him to slow down and wait. Pair followed along with Smiley and Angry, while Chifuyu dragged Takemichi, with Hakai close behind. Mana looked at Mitsuya and asked if she could have another one. Mitsuya sighed and nodded, lacking the courage to say no. Bakugo walked toward the truck with Mitsuya but stopped when he noticed his friends lagging behind. He raised an eyebrow at the group and asked if they wanted ice cream or not, snapping them out of their daze. The group nodded and rushed toward him, and he continued walking with Mana still in his arms, hugging her purple plush tightly. The boys took the girls to the mall, exploring Shibuya and Tokyo. Kazutora joined them since the girls invited him along, not wanting to leave him behind. Denki suggested that since they were there, they should get haircuts. He faced Kazutora, Todoroki, and Kirishima, mentioning that Kirishima had wanted to dye his hair red again. Kirishima nodded in agreement, saying that if they were going, he would join them. Todoroki also agreed, and Kazutora mentioned knowing a good place. As Kirishima, Todoroki, and Kazutora separated from the group, Kami noticed and asked where they were going. 𝗧𝗏 explained that they were just getting haircuts. Kami remarked that she could have done it herself, not wanting them to spend money. Denki expressed surprise at this, and Kami explained that she often helped a friend dye his hair, so she knew her way around hair dyes. 𝗧𝗏 then ran off to catch up with the trio. Bakugo appeared beside Kami and asked where 𝗧𝗏 was going. Denki informed him that 𝗧𝗏 was following after Kirishima, Todoroki, and Kazutora to prevent them from wasting money on haircuts. Bakugo told them to hurry up before walking back to the others. After shopping, the group returned to the apartment, where Kami prepared to help the three with their haircuts and dyeing. She asked who wanted to go first, and Kirishima volunteered to sit in the chair. Denki suggested that Kirishima could just dye half or the top of his hair, or maybe just his bangs. Kirishima questioned why, and Denki handed him his phone, showing him some styles he thought would suit him. Kirishima turned to Kami, showing her Denki's phone, and she agreed that the styles looked great. She encouraged him to pick one, and Kirishima decided on highlights. Kami then grabbed the red hair dye and rushed to the nearest bathroom. Denki pointed out a style for Kazutora, and another for Todoroki, who was considering dyeing his white part black, believing it would make him look more intimidating. Midoriya mentioned that Takemichi was doing well and would contact them if he needed help. A few minutes later, Kami finished dyeing Kirishima's hair, and Kazutora was next, opting to bleach only his bangs. Todoroki decided to dye his white part black, wanting to look more intimidating with a black and red style. Denki complimented Kirishima on his new look, and Bakugo made a playful remark about his appearance. Kami finished styling Kirishima's hair, and the group admired the transformation. Kirishima then turned to the others, asking if they wanted to change their hair. Uraraka hesitated, saying her parents might not approve, and 𝗧𝗏 agreed, preferring to stay as she was. Kami asked Bakugo if he wanted a change, and he agreed to sit in the chair. Denki suggested trying to style Bakugo's hair down, as they hadn't seen him without his usual puffy style. Kami nodded and grabbed a hairbrush. After a while, she announced that she was finished, and the group was surprised by Bakugo's new look. Kirishima smiled, and Denki noted that he looked like Todoroki but blonde. Denki then showed Bakugo a style on his phone, and Bakugo agreed to it. Kami asked if he wanted to add an undercut, and Kirishima encouraged him to try something new. Bakugo expressed doubt about looking good with a different hairstyle, but Kazutora and Todoroki reassured him that they would help. After all the hair dyeing and cutting, the group finally finished and went to sleep, excited about the upcoming event they were invited to. On the day of the event, they wore their kimonos and made their way to the shrine, eager to stay together as they walked around. When they spotted Chifuyu with Paiyang, Todoroki greeted them with a smile. Paiyang asked about the girls, and Kami clarified that they were just friends. 𝗧𝗏 nodded, expressing her eagerness to meet the others inside. Chifuyu walked toward the entrance with a smile, and the group followed, taking in their surroundings. They never imagined they would attend an event without the constant worry of villains planning an attack, which brought them relief. Although they missed home and were far away, they felt grateful to spend this time with Takemichi and the rest of Tamon, who had taught them lessons they never expected to learn in a place like this. Denki turned to the group, wondering if he had just heard Takemichi. 𝗧𝗏 nodded in agreement, suggesting it was probably him. Uraraka pointed toward a stall, urging everyone to write their wishes. She grabbed 𝗧𝗏 and pulled her toward the store, and the others followed suit, each picking up a wooden plaque and a black marker. Chifuyu observed them with a grin, noting how serious they looked as they wrote their wishes. After finishing, Midoriya had written about his dream of becoming a hero, while Uraraka wished to help her parents. 𝗧𝗏 expressed a similar wish for her family, Mina hoped for their success as pro-heroes, and Kami wished that the friendships formed here would last. Kirishima wrote something about himself, Denki focused on his quirk, 𝗧𝗏 wished for his classmates, and Bakugo noted something about the people they had met. Once they completed their wishes, they made their way to the shrine to hang them up. Denki suggested they look for the others, and just then, 𝐭𝐬𝐫 pointed out a plaque that had been dropped. Chifuyu picked it up, and they all turned to see 𝗧𝗵𝐺 approaching, surprised to see them. 𝗧𝗵𝐺 asked for his plaque back, but Chifuyu playfully tossed it away. 𝗧𝗵𝐺 dashed after it, and Bakugo smirked at the sight. Chifuyu proposed they follow 𝗧𝗵𝐺, and the group agreed, trailing behind him. As they followed, they encountered Smiley and Mucho, and soon after, they stumbled upon Mikey, Draken, and Emma. Bakugo remarked on 𝗧𝗵𝐺's loudness when he noticed Mikey holding his plaque. Mikey suggested they all jump together, and they counted down, huddling up before shouting Happy New Year. As they leaped, leaving 𝗧𝗵𝐺's plaque forgotten. After the celebration, the group decided to check on Bnha, who had recently been released from the hospital. Upon arriving at his house, they knocked on the front door, which was opened by a raven-haired woman in an apron. She asked if they were friends of Keisuke, and Midoriya nodded. The woman smiled and invited them in, promising to call Bnha. As they waited in the living room, they heard hurried footsteps, followed by Bnha's voice as he nearly slipped. When he appeared, the group turned to him, and he greeted them with a smile, showing his canines. 𝗧𝗫𝐵 presented a bag that Kazutora had prepared for Bnha, who thanked him and placed it on the coffee table. He inquired about their visit and the girls, who were introduced as friends who had tagged along. Midoriya asked how Bnha was feeling, and Bnha replied that he was fine but couldn't go out because his mom had forbidden it. Midoriya reassured him that he was doing well, mentioning his scars. Bnha acknowledged that he would likely have a scar from his injury. 𝗧𝗏 informed Bnha about an upcoming meeting on the 5th, but Bnha expressed uncertainty about attending, depending on his mother's permission. Denki reassured him that they would deliver the details afterward. Bnha then mentioned that his mom would probably insist they stay for a meal, but 𝗧𝗵𝐺 declined, stating they had only come to check on him and share news about Tamon. After catching up for a while, the group left, aware that Bnha's mom was a bit disappointed they didn't stay for dinner. Denki looked up at the sky with a smile, expressing how much fun they had. 𝗧𝗏 agreed, noting it had been a while since they enjoyed themselves so much. Uraraka smiled, grateful to have spent Christmas with them, and 𝗬 echoed her sentiment, never expecting such a fun holiday. Bakugo, however, urged them to head home, quickening his pace. Kami ran after him, and 𝗧𝗏 commented on Bakugo's tendency to disrupt the moment before following along with 𝗧𝗫𝐵 and Denki. Midoriya turned to Todoroki, encouraging him to join them, and Mina grabbed 𝗬 and Uraraka's hands as they all ran after the group. On January 5, 2006, 𝗧𝗵𝐺 hurriedly knocked on the door of the group's apartment. Someone on the other side responded before opening the door to reveal Kazutora, who was surprised to see 𝗧𝗵𝐺. Denki appeared behind Kazutora, acknowledging 𝗧𝗵𝐺 and explaining that they had forgotten to inform him that 𝗧𝗵𝐺 had been released from juvie a month ago. Kazutora stepped aside to let 𝗧𝗵𝐺 in, who smiled and asked if everyone was present. Denki confirmed and went to call the others. Kazutora invited 𝗧𝗵𝐺 inside and headed to the kitchen. 𝗧𝗵𝐺 noticed the girls sitting on the floor. Uraraka greeted him with a smile, and he shyly introduced himself. Kami encouraged him to sit beside her on the sofa, and she introduced herself along with Mina, who got close to his face, also welcoming him. 𝗧𝗵𝐺 stepped back, surprised by how close their faces were. Tsuyu introduced herself, saying he could call her 𝗬. She nodded at him while gently pulling Mina away. Ochako Uraraka smiled as she introduced herself, expressing her happiness to finally meet 𝗧𝗵𝐺 in person. 𝗧𝗏, placing an arm around 𝗧𝗵𝐺 as he sat beside him, asked what brought him there. The others in the living room gathered around, the girls eager to listen. 𝗧𝗵𝐺 began to explain about his time leaping. Bakugo interrupted, expressing disbelief that 𝗧𝗵𝐺 might not be able to do it anymore. 𝗧𝗵𝐺 quickly clarified that he wanted to ask for their opinions on the best course of action. Denki suggested it would be better for 𝗧𝗵𝐺 to stay, while 𝗧𝗫𝐵 agreed, saying he should see if anything else might happen beyond what they had already experienced. 𝗧𝗵𝐺 turned to the girls, inquiring if they were from the same place. The boys nodded in response. 𝗧𝗵𝐺 was curious about how they arrived there, and 𝗬 explained that they had come through a villain. Uraraka added that the time difference was concerning since a year had passed since the girls disappeared, while only a few months had gone by for them. Kami pointed out that their absence was causing worry. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 asked Midoriya if there was really no other way to resolve the situation. Midoriya confirmed that they had tried everything and suggested they should wait until they were sent back. Midoriya had recently recovered from a serious incident that had left him in the hospital for 3 weeks. Since then, the group, especially Bakugo, had kept a close eye on him to prevent any further mishaps. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 then inquired about 𝗵𝗃, and Denki informed him that 𝗵𝗃 was doing well after their recent visit. Kirishima asked about Hina, wondering if 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 and she had reconciled. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 confirmed they were back together, hinting that it was evident during the festival. Meanwhile, 2 males walked through the hallways of UA, exchanging greetings with passing students. One of them, Hisashi, suggested to Shota that he should relax. Shota expressed his concern over 2 of his top students disappearing and an unknown individual appearing without a quirk. Hisashi reminded him that it was not just 2 students but now 6, and then 10. Shota sighed, acknowledging the stress of the situation. Hisashi reassured him that they were doing everything possible to find the culprit. Upon entering the teacher's lounge, they found the unknown male waiting for them. He had short black hair and was dressed casually. Hisashi greeted him with a smile and asked if he was busy. The male offered to leave, but Shota invited him to stay. The male expressed his longing to help with the search as a way to repay Shota for allowing him to stay. Shota agreed to inform Nezu about it and inquired about the male's stay in the dorms. The male mentioned that the class was curious about the progress of the search. Shota promised to update them later. After the male left, Shota sighed, looking at the papers on his desk. It had been a year since the disappearance of his students, and the only clue they had was that a villain with a teleportation quirk had sent them somewhere unknown. A group of professionals was assigned to search for the villain throughout the city. The class had not been the same since the incident, and now that 9 students were missing, he felt uncertain about the next steps. As Denki and the group made their way to the shrine for the 𝗳𝗏 meeting, Denki wondered what would happen next. 𝗧𝗏 shrugged, expressing hope that Kisaki would finally be out of the picture. The group agreed to wait and see as they reached the shrine. They climbed the stairs, standing together and avoiding their respective divisions this time. Denki voiced his concerns about how they would return, and Kirishima echoed the uncertainty. Midoriya reminded them that it was better to hope for a safe return without causing disruption. The meeting began shortly after ensuring everyone was present, with Дракон announcing the first 𝗳𝗏 meeting of the year. Mikey explained that 𝗳𝗏 and the Black Dragons had faced conflict despite an initial peace agreement, which had failed due to discord between the Shiba brothers. He recounted the clash that occurred on Christmas, where 𝗳𝗏 emerged victorious after a challenging battle. Дракон then called 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐫 to the front to discuss the matter further. 𝗎𝐻𝐢 admitted that the conflict had stemmed from a small lie he told, which ultimately dragged his family and 𝗳𝗏 into the situation. Midoriya reflected on the importance of protecting family, whether related by blood or not, and the others nodded in agreement. 𝗎𝐻𝐢 took responsibility for the escalating problem that led to the conflict between 𝗳𝗏 and the Black Dragons. 𝗎𝐻𝐢 expressed his apologies with a bow. The other gang members appeared unfazed, especially after the captains and vice-captains reassured him that he remained welcome in 𝗳𝗏. 𝗧𝗏 inquired if there was more to the story, and the group nodded in agreement. Дракон then called for the second individual, Inui, to step forward. The group exchanged glances, particularly Midoriya, Denki, and 𝗧𝗏, who recognized Inui as he emerged behind Дракон and Mikey, accompanied by another person they had seen in the church. Inui introduced himself as Seishu Inui from the 11th generation Black Dragons. The other individual, Hajime Kokonoi, followed suit with his introduction. Whispers circulated among the gang members, surprised to see them. They recalled that the 11th generation Black Dragons had previously been defeated by 𝗳𝗏. Kokonoi announced that their former leader, Taiju Shiba, had retired, and they had taken over as leaders of the 11th generation. Inui continued, explaining that after discussions with Mikey, they had decided to join 𝗳𝗏. Denki expressed his surprise, and 𝗧𝗏 and Kirishima nodded in agreement. Mikey assigned the Black Dragons to the First Division, placing them under 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 Hankaki's command. The group turned to 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻 and Chifuyu's division, congratulating them. 𝗧𝗵𝗄𝐻, taken aback, confirmed his new responsibility. 𝗏𝗀𝐻 clarified that the Black Dragons preferred to be under 𝗧𝗵𝐻's leadership. 𝗏𝗃𝗀 voiced his distrust of the newcomers, prompting Midoriya to express concern about 𝗏𝗃𝗀's reaction. As the two approached 𝗧𝗵𝐻, whispers erupted among the other gang members. Draken called for silence, and 𝗏𝗀𝐻 shifted the conversation to the Christmas conflict, addressing Teta Kisaki directly. When Kisaki acknowledged him, 𝗏𝗀𝗻 announced his dismissal. The gang members were astonished, murmuring about Kisaki's firing and questioning the reasoning behind it. Hanma interjected, warning that if Kisaki was let go, he would leave too, along with many others, which would significantly reduce Tomon's numbers. 𝗏𝗀𝗻 remained resolute, stating that Tomon had grown too large. 𝗏𝗃𝗀 dismissed the concerns, confident in their own strength. 𝗏𝗏𝗀 then questioned Kisaki about his involvement in the Christmas conflict, leading to more murmurs among the gang members. 𝗏𝗃𝗀 smirked at Kisaki's attempts to plead his case, deciding it was time to leave. As he walked away, the others followed, hearing Draken announce the meeting's conclusion. The group was surprised to find Kazutora on Todoroki's bike, smiling at their arrival. Midoriya asked what brought Kazutora there, to which he replied that he wanted to see how things were going in Tomon. Kirishima suggested they leave, and they hopped onto their bikes, with Todoroki riding behind Kazutora, Denki on Zero's bike, and Midoriya on his own. They sped off before the other gang members could catch up. At a stoplight, Denki asked if anyone was up for brunch, and Kirishima inquired about their destination. Zero shrugged, unsure, and turned to Todoroki and Kazutora, who both agreed that anywhere was fine. Midoriya suggested inviting the girls, and Denki pulled out his phone to call Mina. Over the next few days, the group explored the city with Kazutora as their guide. A few days later, 𝗧𝗵𝐻 called, announcing he was returning and asking if they could take a picture before he left. Denki enthusiastically agreed, and Kazutora was pulled into the photo by Todoroki and Midoriya. Mina was there to take the picture, along with the other girls who had come to check on them. After the photo was taken, the group wanted copies, so the girls insisted on getting them printed with Kazutora while the boys stayed with 𝗧𝗵𝐻. Once the girls left, the boys found themselves at a loss for words. Denki wished 𝗧𝗵𝐻 good luck on his mission, and Zero expressed their support, prompting 𝗏𝗃𝗀 to agree, albeit with a smirk. Midoriya looked at the others and shared that they had enjoyed their time together and looked forward to meeting again if the opportunity arose. They all wished 𝗧𝗏𝗵𝐻 well, and after he retrieved his camera, he had to leave to meet with 𝗏𝗃𝗀 and the others. Denki sighed, looking up at the sky, while Zero nodded in agreement. Uraraka then turned to them, hinting at something they had forgotten to mention, but 𝗬 suggested they discuss it later. Denki, confused, accepted this and waited for further clarification.